I spent $200,000 to get rid of my cheating wife and saved my daughter's future. We were married for 19 years, together for 23, when she became aloof and distant, finally declaring that our marriage seemed likely over and that she was on a healing path, AA, while I was broken, engaged in career, doting on family, music making, furniture building, friends, sports. She was spending increasing amounts of time out of the house to help celebrate a friend's sobriety. A teenage daughter and I were home together without mom many nights. Things got increasingly worse, with the wife stating she was willing to not file for divorce until the daughter went off to college, with occasional vocalized, "What am I thinking? We've built a great life together," interludes. Finally, after about 5 months of this, I couldn't take it anymore and read her emails, searched on love. Bang. Confronted her. She asked what I found out. First mistake, told her. Got a new set of lies that conveniently served as least harmful explanation of my evidence. We only made out once. It was awful. We're just friends. I was crushed, having endured this before with my first wife. I told her she had to end contact with this guy, and we spent the weekend rebonding, or so I thought. Things seemed to be on a healing path. But over the next couple of weeks, she started backsliding into the acrimony she had inflicted upon me earlier. She began to urge me to work on my upper chest. I told her that I commuted by bicycle 20 miles a day and was in very good shape. I said I felt fine about my body. Her boyfriend had some big chest. I would learn. More night celebrations. I got a phone she had recently upgraded from and did a deep forensics dive. I found very explicit text messages indicating full carnality. Turns out her lover was a junkie she met in AA. 5'8" to my 6'2", bankrupt, estranged from his family, pock-faced, poorly educated. I graduated from a top 10 university and was and currently am a technology executive, making very good money. I was at least relieved that this reinforced my existing knowledge that it was never about me. Reconfronted her. She wanted to know what new information I found. I told her, no, you'll just make up a new set of lies. Tell me everything or get out of my house. Keep in mind, I already know more than you can imagine. It all came spilling out in ugly waves, all the basic Zex moves one is driven to in self-destruction. I insisted she write it all out in detail. I confronted her junkie boyfriend at the third-rate hotel he worked in, blew that crap up. His hotel chain transferred him after I confronted him in the lobby. I told her I would consider the gift of reconciliation, but that she had an enormous amount of work to win back my shattered trust. She seemed grateful for the chance. Second mistake, should have insisted she move out for some period of time. Unbeknownst to me, the teenage daughter had been reading Mom's emails and knew all the tawdry details. A couple of weeks after the big D-Day, the daughter got drunk, dropped some pills, drove a car off the road, miraculously not injuring herself or others as the car flipped, teetering above a rain-swollen creek. Daughter got a huge DWI, was kicked out of National Honor Society, and shamed at school. Mom decided I had to deal with all this because she couldn't. A couple of weeks later, my ex had a complete parental breakdown. She screamed at our daughter, "Duck you, you're the reason I want to get crap-faced drunk." Then she peeled out of the driveway at a high rate of speed to a fate my daughter and I couldn't ponder. Our daughter was extremely upset, as one could imagine. I reassured her that her mother's outburst was completely unacceptable and was about her mother's cognitive and emotional state, and not a reflection on her daughter. Mom eventually returned, remorseful, but minimizing what she had done. Then a transformation then occurred. Where our daughter had been overly angry at her mother, now our daughter knew she couldn't be angry at her mother, as it could lead her mother to end her life, which, in the twisted logic of Mom's tantrum, would be the daughter's fault. So daughter took her otherwise understandable anger out on me. Mom, greatly relieved, fomented her daughter's revectored impulse to be angry at me. Mom encouraged her daughter to see me as the villain and the rightful recipient of rage. An alcoholic, Mom had to protect her alcoholic ego and if it meant emotionally manipulating, offending her own daughter, no problem. This got worse and worse. My wife began to see herself as the real victim in all this, which in perverse hindsight, she actually was. She declared with great relief that I've forgiven myself. She would stalk me on internet support groups for victims of infidelity. Third mistake, telling her about my support systems, where she would find fodder for new screaming arguments. As should be fairly predictable by now, things completely fell apart when a year into our attempted reconciliation, she erupted in a mocking diatribe about my deepest insecurities and sadness, the place every longtime spouse knows about the other and knows to never exploit. She went there hard, imitating me from moments years prior where I had shared my deepest vulnerabilities. She mockingly went into fake tears and exaggerated self pity while maniacally cackling at my extreme discomfort. But that was my light bulb moment, and I now see it as a wonderful and enlightening event. If in this time in which I was offering the gift of an opportunity to win my trust back, she was willing to obliterate all norms of marital decorum to exploit the intimate vulnerabilities I had shared with her, my spouse of some 20 years, in order to vent her misdirected shame, then clearly and irrevocably she could never be trusted again. At that moment, I knew I had to be rid of this cancer. I was now certain I could never trust her again. And I was not willing to be in a relationship with an irredeemably untrustworthy person. Where I had been racked with ambivalence before, I had a calm certainty. The divorce settlement was ugly. I ended up paying her $200,000 to keep the house I had already paid for and keep my pension I had worked 20 years for. Even though she worked and made a good salary, I had paid all the household bills, mortgage, car payments, taxes, insurance, food, etc. for the entire marriage. Not sure where all her money went over the years, likely to her junkie boyfriend, who knows. The saving grace was the house appraiser she and her attorney insisted on, ended up lowballing the value of the house by several $100,000. That saved me from real financial ruin, and I got to keep my dream house, a custom-made high-end home perched on a ridge on 3 wooded acres high above a beautiful, environmentally preserved river. It's not a huge home, but has a detached recording studio for my music, a woodworking shop, and is the calmest place I've ever been. 4 years later, things are much better for my daughter and me. Our relationship is strong again, although her scars are still vicious and deep. She got into a very competitive college in New York City where she's about to graduate. She tells me how much she appreciates that I never badmouth her mom, around her at least, while telling me how stressful it is when her mom curses me and speaks disparagingly about me, openly and to anyone who'll listen. Now my ex refers to her affair as my cry for help and blames me for not seeing it as such. As she tells her remaining friends, I just slept with this guy a few times and utterly bored was too selfish to try to understand my pain. In her telling, it was the Zex. She will never understand how minor that is compared to the overall context of complete destruction of trust. When I hear these statements through the grapevine, my overwhelming reaction is one of relief. Now I have an amazing girlfriend who is emotionally competent. My daughter likes her too. What I wish I had done. A full 180. Demanded a postnup as a symbol of her commitment to reconciliation. Invited her to move out as soon as I had proof of her cheating. What I'm glad I did. Hung in there until I had 100% certainty. Never badmouthed mom around our daughter. Found support systems. Confronted her junkie lover. Knew this had nothing to do with me, but only my ex's brokenness. Update. 6 years ago last night, I reconfronted her after she had admitted to some inappropriate making out with a guy based on my finding incriminating emails. The reconfrontation involved seeing her continuing text dialogue with the guy after the initial confrontation and remorse. I rooted her phone, found all sorts of disgusting, incriminating evidence of her affair with a junkie she met in AA. 6 years ago last night, our daughter was at a friend's house for the evening. I told my now ex we have to talk. She looked worried. What about? She asked. I just want to make sure I understand what went on between you and him. I stated a bunch of statements she had said in her first micro confession. Many of these statements I knew were lies. Some I figured to be true. Yes, that's all true, she said with increasing nervousness. Then I said, I know for a fact that you're lying. Tell me the whole truth or get out of this house and don't come back. I was furious. She spat back, What is it that you think isn't true? I said, Oh no, I'm not going to fall for that again. If I tell you what I know, you'll just make up a new set of lies to explain it all. Tell me everything or I will kick you out of this house. She collapsed and spilled most everything. Multiple encounters, BJ, many positions, all done in evenings when she was supposedly going out to celebrate an AA buddy's sobriety date. I collapsed in fury, sadness, heartbreak, the full mix of every negative emotion in the human range of feelings, each emotion maxed into the red and all at once. Within a couple of days, I went to the hotel he worked for and said to him in the lobby loudly, So that's your game. Seducing mentally ill married women you meet in AA meetings. He was moved to another state. He began to make veiled threats to our family. We tried to reconcile. She was good at first, but over time, she backslid into the kind of narcissism that drives weak people to alcohol. She spied on me in internet support forums so she could start fights. She threatened to end her life to our daughter's face, blaming her for it. Daughter turned all her anger to me, the safe parent. Then, at the 1-year anniversary of D-Day, 5 years ago yesterday, she went into a withering diatribe of my deepest vulnerabilities, insecurities about my children and family, mocking me and laughing to see what pain she caused me. I knew back then that time would heal. Not completely, but I knew that all of this is to say it does get better, way better. I know a lot of you are going through a tough time, but I promise you, if you hang in there and reach out for help, things get better, way better. Update. Twice I had families destroyed by spousal infidelity. Kids involved, messes galore, hundreds of thousands of dollars lost in legal fees and estate settlements, thousands invested in therapy for all damaged by it. Nevertheless, this Saturday, my beloved girlfriend of 5 years and I had an intimate wedding service before family in the front yard and promised faithfulness, loyalty, and patience for the rest of our lives. It was a beautiful service. My 3 grandsons were the flower boys. They were diligent, but the 2-year-old wandered off to play with the toys he knew were in Grandpa's house instead of scattering flower petals. The minister was a friend of my new wife's, the photographer a friend of mine for 40 years, and a childhood friend of my new wife's helped organize. It was a beautiful, low-humidity, sunny but hot day in North Carolina. I love my father-in-law. My new mother-in-law is in the intermediate stages of Alzheimer's, but at least she knew her daughter was getting married to me, so that's good. My new stepdaughter is great, a 30-year-old therapist who is moving with her adorable mathematician boyfriend on a postdoc fellowship. My 3 kids get a stepmom, and the grandkids get a new grandmother. Bottom line, for those so inclined, you can find trust again. You can find love, and there are truly warm-hearted people out there.
Hello, and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. We've got another thrilling story to share, and we hope it's one you'll enjoy. Now, let's get started. Matthew Woods stepped out of his car, briefcase in hand, and took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. The streetlights flickered on as he walked up the driveway, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. It had been another grueling day at the lab, but the thrill of scientific discovery always left him feeling invigorated. As he opened the front door, the familiar scent of home greeted him. "Betsy?" he called out, slipping off his shoes. His wife appeared in the hallway, a forced smile plastered on her face. "Welcome home, dear. How was work?" Matthew's brow furrowed slightly. Something about Betsy's demeanor seemed off. Her eyes darted nervously, never quite meeting his gaze. He brushed it off, attributing it to the stress of her real estate job. It was productive. We're making real progress on the Sustainable Urban Development Project. Betsy nodded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. That's great. Dinner's in the oven. I'll bring it out in a few minutes. As Matthew settled into his favorite armchair, a wave of dizziness washed over him. He gripped the armrest, waiting for it to pass. These spells had been occurring more frequently after work meetings lately. He made a mental note to schedule a checkup, then pushed the thought aside as Betsy brought in a plate of food. The next morning, Matthew arrived at the research facility, greeting his team with a nod. The conference room buzzed with excitement as they prepared for their upcoming presentation to city officials. All right, team, Matthew began, spreading out a series of charts on the table. Let's run through the key points one more time. As they delved into the intricacies of their Sustainable Urban Development Plan, Matthew's colleague, Shane Hampton, leaned in close. You okay, Matt? You seem a bit off. Matthew waved away Shane's concern. Just a bit tired. Nothing to worry about. Shane's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. Those dizzy spells still bothering you? It's fine, Matthew insisted, redirecting the conversation back to their project. Now, about the proposed green spaces. As the meeting wrapped up, Matthew headed to the cafeteria for lunch. He grabbed a tray and found a quiet corner to review his notes for the afternoon's crucial meeting with his boss, Tyler Nicholson. Absorbed in his work, Matthew barely registered the hushed conversation at the next table. Two interns huddled close, their voices barely above a whisper. Did you see that video? One asked, eyes wide. The one with the passed-out guy? The other nodded vigorously. Passed-out husband used for hours, right? God, it's so messed up. Matthew's ears perked up at the phrase, but he dismissed it, focusing instead on his upcoming presentation. He had no time for office gossip, not with so much riding on this meeting. As the afternoon wore on, Matthew made his way to Tyler Nicholson's office. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. Come in, Tyler called out, his voice muffled. Matthew entered, noting the tension in Tyler's shoulders as he sat behind his imposing desk. The older man's eyes darted around the room, never quite settling on Matthew. Afternoon, Tyler, Matthew said, taking a seat. I've got some exciting developments to share about the Urban Sustainability Project. Tyler nodded, his attention clearly elsewhere. As Matthew launched into his presentation, he couldn't help but notice Tyler fidgeting with his phone beneath the desk. So, as you can see from these projections, Matthew's voice trailed off as the room began to spin. He gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady himself. Matthew? You all right? Tyler's voice sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. The world tilted, and then everything went black. When Matthew came to, he found himself lying on the leather couch in Tyler's private office. The overhead lights seemed painfully bright, and his head throbbed with each heartbeat. Tyler loomed over him, a glass of water in hand. You gave us quite a scare there, Woods. Fainted right in the middle of your presentation. Matthew struggled to sit up, his mind foggy. What happened? Low blood sugar, most likely, Tyler said, his tone casual. You've been working yourself too hard. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? As Matthew's vision cleared, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Tyler's explanation seemed plausible, but instinct told him there was more to the story. Thanks, I think I will, Matthew replied, slowly getting to his feet. As he gathered his things, his gaze swept the room, landing on a small, out-of-place object in the corner. A camera lens, barely visible behind a potted plant. Matthew's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. I'll see you tomorrow, Tyler. Sorry about the interruption. Tyler waved him off. No worries. Get some rest. As Matthew left the building, his mind raced. The hidden camera, Tyler's strange behavior, his own unexplained symptoms. Something wasn't adding up. That evening, Matthew sat in his home office, the lights dimmed low. He stared at his phone, debating whether to make the call. Finally, he dialed the number. Jake? It's Matthew. I need your help with something. Discreet. Jake Larkin, an old friend and cybersecurity expert, listened intently as Matthew laid out his concerns. A hidden camera? And you've been having these dizzy spells? Jake's voice crackled through the speaker. Matt, this sounds serious. I'll look into it, but be careful. If someone's targeting you, they might be monitoring your communications. Matthew nodded, even though Jake couldn't see him. Thanks, Jake. I appreciate your discretion on this. As he ended the call, Matthew heard Betsy's footsteps in the hallway. He quickly composed himself, turning to greet her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Everything okay? Betsy asked, leaning against the doorframe. Matthew nodded, his face a mask of calm. Just work stuff. Nothing to worry about. As Betsy retreated, Matthew turned back to his computer, his jaw set with determination. Someone was trying to undermine him, and he was going to find out who and why. The next week crawled by, each day a careful dance of pretense. Matthew went about his routine, all while keeping his senses heightened for any clues. He noticed Tyler watching him more closely, and Betsy's nervous energy seemed to intensify. Finally, Jake reached out with his findings. They met in a quiet corner of a local park, away from prying eyes and potential listening devices. Jake's face was grim as he handed Matthew a sealed envelope. It's worse than we thought, Matt. The security footage. It shows Tyler adding something to your drinks during meetings. And that viral video you mentioned? It's you, man. Unconscious in Tyler's office. Matthew's blood ran cold. And Betsy? Jake hesitated, then nodded. She's in the video too. I'm sorry, Matt. For a moment, Matthew felt as if the ground had opened up beneath him. His wife and his boss, conspiring against him. The betrayal cut deep, but as the initial shock wore off, a cold determination settled in its place. Thank you, Jake, Matthew said, his voice steady. I need you to keep this quiet for now. Can you do that? Jake nodded, concern etched on his face. What are you going to do? Matthew's eyes hardened. I'm going to play their game and win. Over the next few days, Matthew put his plan into motion. He installed hidden cameras in his home and office, carefully positioning them to catch any suspicious activity. He began keeping detailed records of his interactions with Tyler and Betsy, noting every inconsistency, every nervous glance. As he built his case, Matthew reached out to an old college friend, Jameson Wilcox, now working as an investigative journalist. Over a secure line, Matthew laid out the situation. Jesus, Matt, Jameson breathed. This is huge. We need to be careful about how we handle this. If we move too fast, they might destroy evidence. Matthew agreed. That's why I need your help. We need to expose the truth without compromising the investigation. Can you do it? Jameson's voice was filled with determination. Count me in. We'll bring these bastards down. As Matthew ended the call, he felt a satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. Tyler and Betsy had no idea what was coming. In the lab, Matthew threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. His urban development project was gaining traction, and he used it as a shield, hiding his true intentions behind a facade of scientific passion. During a particularly intense brainstorming session, Sharon Reeves, the mayor's chief of staff, stopped by to observe. Her eyes lit up as Matthew explained their innovative approach to sustainable city planning. This is impressive work, Dr. Woods, she said, her voice warm with approval. The mayor will be very interested in hearing more about this. Matthew nodded, allowing himself a small smile. Thank you, Ms. Reeves. We're excited about the potential impact on our city. As Sharon left, Matthew caught Tyler watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. The game was afoot, and Matthew was determined to come out on top. Matthew Woods sat at his desk, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his computer screen. The office was quiet, most of his colleagues having left for the day. He scrolled through a series of emails, his eyes narrowing as he pieced together the puzzle of betrayal. Over the past month, Matthew had meticulously documented every instance of Tyler's poisoning attempts. The security footage Jake had provided was damning, showing Tyler surreptitiously adding a substance to Matthew's drinks during meetings. But it was the trail of emails between Tyler and Betsy that truly made his blood boil. Have you taken care of it? Betsy's message read, We can't risk him finding out about our little arrangement with Apex Corporation. Tyler's response was equally incriminating. Don't worry, sweetheart. Another week of this, and he'll be too addled to notice anything. We'll have him committed before he can blow the whistle on our deal. Matthew's jaw clenched as he read through their exchanges. The long-standing affair was bad enough, but their plot to discredit him and their involvement with a rival company crossed a line he couldn't ignore. He leaned back in his chair, a smile playing on his lips. It was time to turn the tables. The next morning, Matthew strode into the office with a spring in his step. He made a show of fumbling with his coffee mug, spilling a few drops on his shirt. "Everything all right, Matt?" Tyler asked, his concern a perfect mask for his true intentions. Matthew gave a sheepish grin. "Just a bit clumsy today. Think I might be coming down with something." Tyler's eyes gleamed with barely concealed satisfaction. "Why don't you take it easy? We can't have our star scientist under the weather." As Tyler walked away, Matthew allowed himself a small smirk. The bait had been taken. Over the next few weeks, Matthew carefully planted false information, leading Tyler and Betsy to believe their plan was working. He'd stumble during presentations, forget key details in meetings, and generally play the part of a man slowly losing his grip. Tyler and Betsy grew increasingly arrogant, their guard dropping as they reveled in their apparent success. Little did they know, Matthew was documenting their every move, building an airtight case against them. Meanwhile, Matthew threw himself into his work on the urban development project. He spent long nights poring over data, refining his proposals, and reaching out to influential city council members. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. During a presentation to the city's planning committee, Sharon Reeves, the mayor's chief of staff, leaned forward, her eyes alight with interest. "Dr. Woods, this is truly groundbreaking work," she said as Matthew concluded his presentation. "Your approach to integrating green spaces with urban infrastructure could revolutionize city planning." Matthew nodded, allowing a hint of pride to show. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves. It's been a labor of love." As he packed up his materials, Matthew caught sight of Tyler lurking at the back of the room, his face a mask of barely concealed rage. The game was far from over, but Matthew was winning. Back at home, Betsy paced the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Something wasn't right. Matthew's behavior had been off lately, yes, but there was an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. After a moment's hesitation, she pressed call. "Daryl? It's Betsy Woods. I need your services." Daryl Chase, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion, listened as Betsy laid out her concerns. "I need you to track my husband. His behavior. I think he might be on to us." "Consider it done, Mrs. Woods," Daryl replied, his voice gruff. "I'll start immediately." What Betsy didn't know was that Daryl was an old acquaintance of Matthew's. As soon as he hung up, he placed another call. "Matt? It's Daryl. We need to talk." The next day, Matthew met Daryl in a quiet corner of a local park. Daryl filled him in on Betsy's suspicions and her request to have him followed. Matthew's eyes glinted with a mix of anger and determination. "Thanks for the heads up, Daryl. I think we can use this to our advantage." Over the next few days, Matthew carefully fed Daryl misleading information. He'd make a show of visiting therapists, researching memory loss, and generally playing into Tyler and Betsy's narrative. Daryl, in turn, reported back to Betsy, further convincing her and Tyler of their success. Emboldened by their perceived victory, Tyler and Betsy began making bolder moves. Matthew overheard snippets of conversation about having him committed to a mental health facility, their voices filled with a sickening glee. Little did they know, Matthew was always one step ahead. As Matthew's project continued to gain traction, he found himself preparing for a major conference. The auditorium was packed with key stakeholders, city officials, and potential investors. Matthew took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and stepped onto the stage. For the next hour, he captivated the audience with his vision of a sustainable, thriving city. Graphs and projections flashed across the screen behind him, each one telling a story of innovation and progress. As he concluded his presentation, the room erupted in applause. Matthew caught sight of Sharon Reeves in the front row, nodding approvingly. Next to her, several investors were already pulling out their checkbooks. The success of the conference was a double-edged sword. While it secured significant funding for Matthew's project, it also posed a threat to Tyler's position in the company. Matthew could feel the tension building, like a storm about to break. He didn't have to wait long for Tyler and Betsy to make their move. The annual company gala was in full swing. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Matthew made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. From across the room, he caught sight of Tyler and Betsy huddled in a corner, their heads close together as they whispered furiously. Matthew's eyes narrowed. He'd been expecting something like this. As if on cue, a waiter appeared at his elbow, offering a tray of drinks. "Compliments of Mr. Nicholson, sir," the young man said, gesturing towards a glass of amber liquid. Matthew smiled, taking the glass. "How thoughtful. Please, let me return the favor." In a smooth motion, he switched his glass with another on the tray. "Would you mind taking this one to Mr. Nicholson? Tell him it's a toast to our continued success." The waiter nodded, oblivious to the undercurrents at play, and made his way towards Tyler. Matthew watched as Tyler accepted the drink, raising it in a mock salute before taking a large swig. Within minutes, the effects began to show. Tyler's face flushed, his movements becoming erratic. He stumbled towards the stage where the company's CEO was about to give a speech, nearly knocking over a potted plant in the process. "I've got something to say," Tyler slurred, grabbing the microphone. "You all think Matthew Woods is so great, but let me tell you." Before he could continue, Matthew stepped forward, a folder in his hand. "I think that's quite enough, Tyler," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe it's time for some truth." With all eyes on him, Matthew began to lay out the evidence. He presented emails, financial records, and security footage, all pointing to Tyler's misconduct and his collusion with rival companies. As the room erupted in shocked murmurs, Betsy tried to slip away unnoticed. But Matthew's voice cut through the chaos. "And let's not forget the role my wife played in all this." Betsy froze, her face a mask of horror as Matthew continued to unravel their scheme. The board members present looked on in stunned silence, their expressions shifting from disbelief to anger. In the aftermath of the revelation, Matthew found himself in a private meeting with Sharon Reeves. The chaos of the gala had died down, replaced by a tense quiet as the company scrambled to do damage control. Sharon leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Matthew, in light of recent events, the mayor and I have been discussing the future of our city's sustainability initiatives. We believe you're the right person to lead this effort." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "I'm honored, Ms. Reeves. What exactly did you have in mind?" "We want to offer you a position heading up the city's new sustainability initiative," Sharon replied. "It would effectively put you in charge of implementing the very projects you've been developing. And, I might add, it would place you well above Mr. Nicholson in terms of influence and authority." A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. It was more than just a professional victory. It was vindication. "Ms. Reeves, I believe we have a lot to discuss." As Matthew left the office that night, he caught sight of his reflection in a darkened window. The man staring back at him was battle-worn but unbroken. He had faced betrayal, fought back against those who sought to destroy him, and emerged stronger for it. The city skyline stretched out before him, a canvas of possibilities. Matthew allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The game had been long and brutal, but in the end, he had won. And now, it was time to build something new from the ashes of betrayal. The aftermath of the company gala hung over the city like a storm cloud. Tyler Nicholson, once the golden boy of the Environmental Research Division, now found himself suspended pending investigation. His office sat empty, a testament to how quickly fortunes could change. Matthew Wood stood in the doorway of his own office, surveying the scene. He'd won the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Betsy across the room, her usual poise replaced by nervous energy. It was time to end this. "Betsy," Matthew called out, his voice carrying across the hushed office. "A word, please." Betsy's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. She followed Matthew into his office, the click of the door closing behind them echoing like a gunshot. Matthew didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out a series of documents on his desk, emails, financial records, and stills from the infamous video. Care to explain? Matthew's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth it once held for her. Betsy's eyes darted over the evidence, her mind racing. Matthew, it's not what you think. Tyler, save it. Matthew cut her off. I know everything. The affair, the plot to discredit me, your little side business with Apex Corporation. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Betsy's facade crumbled. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached for Matthew's hand. Please, you have to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. I love you, Matthew. We can work this out, can't we? Matthew pulled his hand away, his expression hardening. Love? Is that what you call poisoning your husband and using him for your sick games? He pushed a folder towards her. These are divorce papers. I suggest you sign them. Betsy's demeanor shifted, her pleading giving way to anger. You can't do this to me. After everything we've been through. Everything we've been through? Matthew's laugh was harsh. You mean your betrayal? Your attempts to destroy my career? My life? Oh, and let's not forget, you'll be implicated in the criminal charges against Tyler. I hope it was worth it. The color drained from Betsy's face. Criminal charges? You can't be serious. Matthew leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. Dead serious. You made your choice, Betsy. Now you get to live with the consequences. As realization dawned on her, Betsy's composure shattered completely. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed Tyler's number. Matthew watched her, a mix of disgust and pity on his face. Without another word, he gathered his things and walked out of the office. He'd already moved his belongings to a new apartment. There was nothing left for him in the home they'd shared. As the door closed behind him, he could hear Betsy's frantic voice. Tyler? Tyler, we have a problem. Across town, Tyler Nicholson paced his living room, a glass of scotch in hand. His suspension had hit him hard, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. He'd built his career on cunning and ruthlessness. Surely he could find a way out of this mess. The ringing of his phone startled him. Betsy's name flashed on the screen. He answered, his voice gruff. What is it? Betsy's panicked words spilled out, painting a picture of their situation. Tyler's mind raced, formulating plans and discarding them just as quickly. There had to be a way to turn this around. As night fell, Tyler found himself outside the office building. The security guard was easy enough to distract. A simple story about forgotten documents and a crisp $100 bill did the trick. He made his way to Matthew's office, his heart pounding. If he could just plant some evidence, make it look like Matthew was the one stealing research. Tyler rifled through Matthew's desk, planting false documents and tampering with files on the computer. A smug smile played on his lips. By morning, Matthew would be the one under investigation. What Tyler didn't know was that Matthew's hidden cameras were silently recording his every move. The next day, the board of directors convened for an emergency meeting. Tyler stood before them, barely containing his glee as he presented his findings. As you can see, Tyler said, gesturing to the doctored documents, Matthew Woods has been selling our research to competitors. He's the real criminal here. The board members murmured among themselves, their faces grave. Just as Tyler thought victory was within his grasp, Matthew stepped forward. Interesting theory, Tyler, Matthew said, his voice calm. But I think you'll find this footage more compelling. He nodded to the IT technician, who pulled up the security feed from the night before. The room watched in stunned silence as Tyler's late-night break-in played out on the screen. The color drained from Tyler's face as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered once again. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. Tyler was terminated on the spot, and the chairman announced that the case would be turned over to the authorities. As security escorted Tyler from the building, his phone buzzed with a news alert. His heart sank as he read the headline, Corporate Scandal Exposed, Affair, Corruption, and Betrayal. Jameson Wilcox's expose had hit the press. The article detailed Tyler and Betsy's scheme, their affair, and the truth behind the viral video that had started it all. Within hours, the story had gone viral, spreading across social media and news outlets. Matthew stood in his new office, watching the city buzz below. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Colleagues offering support, journalists seeking comments, even old friends reaching out to reconnect. But there was one call he was waiting for. When it came, he answered on the first ring. "This is Matthew Woods." "Dr. Woods," the voice on the other end said. "This is Special Agent Carter with the FBI. We've been following your case with great interest. I think it's time we had a chat." Matthew smiled. Everything was falling into place. Across town, Tyler and Betsy met in a dingy motel room, their worlds crumbling around them. They'd both lost their jobs, their reputations in tatters. But they weren't ready to give up just yet. "We need to fight back," Tyler snarled, pacing the small room. "We've got dirt on Matthew too. If we go down, he's coming with us." Betsy nodded, her eyes hard. "I've got some manipulated evidence from our encounters. It's not much, but it might be enough to cast doubt on his character." They spent the night planning, scraping together whatever they could to mount one final attack against Matthew. By morning, they were ready to make their move. Matthew was in his new office at City Hall, discussing plans for the Sustainability Initiative with Sharon Reeves when his secretary interrupted. "Mr. Woods? There are 2 people here to see you. They say it's urgent." Matthew exchanged a glance with Sharon. "Send them in." Tyler and Betsy burst into the office, their eyes wild with desperation. Tyler slammed a folder on Matthew's desk. "It's over, Woods," Tyler spat. "We've got enough here to ruin you. Your precious career. Your new position. It'll all come crashing down unless you call off the dogs." Matthew leafed through the documents, his expression unreadable. Doctored photos, manipulated text messages, even a fake recording. They'd been busy. "Impressive," Matthew said, his voice calm. "Desperate, but impressive." He looked up at Tyler and Betsy, a small smile playing on his lips. "But I'm afraid you're too late." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Agent Carter? I think it's time." The door opened, and 2 FBI agents stepped in. Tyler and Betsy's faces fell as they realized they'd walked right into a trap. "Tyler Nicholson, Betsy Woods," Agent Carter said, her voice crisp. "You're under arrest for corporate espionage, blackmail, and attempted fraud." As the agents read them their rights, Matthew stood. "I've been working with the FBI to uncover a larger network of corporate corruption." "Your little scheme?" "It was just the tip of the iceberg." Tyler lunged at Matthew, his face contorted with rage, but the agents quickly restrained him. As they were led away, Betsy looked back at Matthew, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and regret. "I hope it was worth it," she hissed. Matthew's reply was simple. It was. In the following weeks, Matthew threw himself into his new role. The city's sustainability initiative was gaining momentum, with support pouring in from all quarters. On a crisp autumn morning, Matthew stood before the city council, ready to present his vision for a greener future. As he spoke, laying out plans for renewable energy integration, urban gardens, and sustainable transportation, he could feel the energy in the room. This was what he'd fought for, the chance to make a real difference. As Matthew's presentation concluded, the council chamber erupted in applause. Mayor Richardson stepped forward, shaking Matthew's hand vigorously. "Dr. Woods, this is exactly what our city needs," the mayor beamed. "You have our full support." Matthew nodded, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. He glanced at the back of the room, where Agent Carter stood, giving him a subtle nod. The investigation into the larger corruption network was progressing well. Later that afternoon, Matthew found a quiet moment to himself. He stood by the window of his office, looking out over the city skyline. In the distance, he could see the courthouse where Tyler and Betsy were facing justice for their crimes. A small, satisfied smile played on Matthew's lips. He'd been through hell, faced betrayal from those closest to him, and come out stronger. Now, he had the chance to build something meaningful, to shape the future of the city he loved. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, opposition, and likely more attempts to undermine his work. But Matthew was ready. He'd faced down his personal demons and emerged victorious. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Matthew turned back to his desk. There was work to be done, a future to build, and he was just getting started. Epilogue. 6 months had passed since the dust settled on the scandal that rocked the environmental research community. The city had moved on, but the ripples of that tumultuous period were still felt by those involved. Tyler Nicholson sat in his prison cell, the stark reality of his new life a far cry from the luxury he once enjoyed. The trial had been swift and merciless, with the mountain of evidence leaving little room for doubt. He'd been convicted on multiple counts: corporate espionage, attempted poisoning, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge, disgusted by the betrayal of public trust, had handed down a hefty sentence, 20 years without the possibility of parole. His days now consisted of monotonous routine, a stark reminder of how far he'd fallen. The other inmates, having heard of his crimes, treated him with contempt. Tyler, once the manipulator, found himself isolated and powerless. Betsy Woods hadn't fared much better. While her sentence was lighter, 10 years with the possibility of parole after 7, the fall from grace had been spectacular. Her real estate license revoked, her reputation in tatters, she faced each day with the bitter knowledge that she'd thrown away a good life for greed and excitement. In the women's correctional facility, Betsy struggled to adapt. Her attempts to manipulate her way to better treatment backfired, leaving her more isolated than ever. She'd lost everything: her marriage, her career, her freedom, and the weight of her choices hung heavy. Both Tyler and Betsy had been ordered to pay substantial restitution to the companies they'd defrauded. Their assets seized, they would leave prison with nothing but the stigma of their crimes. Meanwhile, life had taken a decidedly different turn for Matthew Woods. Matthew stood at the podium, cameras flashing as he cut the ribbon on the city's first fully sustainable neighborhood. Solar panels glinted on rooftops, electric vehicle charging stations lined the streets, and community gardens bloomed between buildings. "This is just the beginning," Matthew announced, his voice carrying across the eager crowd. "Today, we're not just opening a neighborhood. We're opening the door to a greener, more sustainable future for our city." As he stepped down, shaking hands with city officials and community leaders, Matthew caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Jake Larkin, the friend who had helped uncover the truth, gave him a thumbs up. Beside Jake stood Jameson Wilcox, the journalist whose exposé had blown the lid off the scandal. They'd both played crucial roles in Matthew's journey, and he made a mental note to catch up with them later. The past months had been a whirlwind for Matthew. His work with the FBI had led to the uncovering of a vast network of corporate corruption, resulting in multiple high-profile arrests and a complete overhaul of environmental policy enforcement. He testified before Congress, advocating for stricter regulations and transparency in environmental research. On a personal level, Matthew had found peace. The betrayal he'd experienced had left its scars, but he'd channeled that pain into his work, into making a real difference. He'd started dating again, taking it slow, rebuilding his trust in others one day at a time. As the event wound down, Matthew found a quiet moment to himself. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a news article about the recent denial of Tyler and Betsy's appeals. Justice had been served, but Matthew felt no joy in their suffering. Instead, he felt a sense of closure, of a chapter finally ending. His phone buzzed with a message from Sharon Reeves. "Great work today. The governor wants to meet. Your vision is going statewide." Matthew smiled, pocketing his phone. There was still so much work to do, so many challenges to face. But he was ready. He'd weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As he looked out over the sustainable neighborhood, his vision made reality, Matthew allowed himself a moment of pride. This was his legacy, not the scandal, not the betrayal. This was the future he'd fought for, a future worth believing in. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Matthew took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. And he couldn't wait to get started. In the end, Matthew Woods had not just unmasked the poison that had threatened to destroy him. He transformed it into the catalyst for positive change, turning personal tragedy into triumph for an entire city. And that, he realized, was the sweetest victory of all.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I exposed my cheating wife, won custody of my daughters, and rebuilt my life from the ground up. My wife called me in a panic that Friday morning, asking me to come home. I left the family business my father left to me and my brother and rushed home, sensing something serious. Beth, a stay-at-home mom, never disturbed me at work unless it was urgent. I worried something had happened to one of our teenage daughters at school, perhaps a sports injury, since they were very athletic. My daughters meant the world to me, both growing into beautiful young women like their mother. We ran the largest electrical company in the state. I managed the commercial side, while my brother handled residential. We had tripled our volume each year for the past years, making our mother proud. Last year, we netted $5 million for the first time in the company's 50-year history. Since our fathers passed away, we had turned it into a very successful business, now valued at $20 million. My mother, still the majority shareholder with 52%, made John the president, and my brother and I each owned 24%. After our father died, my mother entrusted me with her personal investments, which I aggressively managed with her broker, yielding great results. When I arrived home, movers were packing our belongings. Beth, standing by her new car I bought her, informed me she was leaving for good. Our daughters had already moved without my knowledge. She handed me divorce papers, stating she had fallen out of love and was with someone else. She left abruptly, ending our 17-year marriage coldly, without any explanation or chance to discuss it with our daughters. I suspected she had met someone online, but quickly realized it was local. I asked the movers for the delivery address and was shocked to recognize it. I tipped the driver, asked him to lock up, and made a stop to verify the address. What I saw shattered my life. Beth had left me for someone we both knew well. This betrayal was devastating, made worse by who she was leaving me for. Beth, her brother, and I were inseparable in our youth, though we drifted apart as we grew older. Her brother, now a Marine, remained a good friend, upholding the morals and principles of his upbringing. With my father's business booming, I spent most of my spare time helping out. Sometimes I'd receive stock for upcoming jobs. I asked why he hadn't used his name for the business. He said, "Tate & Sons is overused and often fails. Parrish, your mother's maiden name, adds spirituality." My older brother John, years my senior, often took me along when delivering materials. He got paid, but I used the time to learn. After TH grade, I started an apprenticeship to earn my electrical license while continuing my education online. I graduated high school before finishing my apprenticeship and began a business management degree, which helped expand our business. John learned the business by working every job and picked up some bad habits along the way. I started bidding on small commercial contracts, completing them under budget, and saving customers money. This word-of-mouth growth exceeded our expectations. My father said I was the brain of the company. JN was the brawn, and both were essential for success. At 20, living on my own, JN called me drunk, needing a ride from a wild party. I went to get him and found Beth needing a ride too. Her father was strict, and she feared his reaction if she didn't get home. Beth, now 17 and stunning, had become a beautiful young woman with mesmerizing blue eyes and a captivating smile. I agreed to drive her home. Her father was relieved to see me instead of her date, saying, "You should have told me your date was James." A week later, Beth found me at my father's shop, asking me to take her to her senior prom. I agreed after getting her father's permission. That night we decided to be exclusive, marking the start of our relationship. Now it was ending. 20 minutes later, I arrived at our office, angry and determined. I went to John's office. His door was shut, and his receptionist said he was on a serious personal call and had locked the door for privacy. "Mary," I said, "please come into my brother's office with me. I need you to witness what I have to say." Mary saw the anger on my face and knew it was serious. "Of course," she replied. I then kicked the door open, barging in. John looked up in surprise and quickly ended his call, giving me his full attention. "You need to get this business appraised and buy my shares out by the time my divorce is final. Do you understand that, John?" Mary was shocked. She had never heard me raise my voice before. "What's this about?" Jan asked. "The movers gave me Beth's new address. I saw my daughter's there," I said. "She's staying with me until she finds a place." Jan replied coldly, "That's a lie." I said, "She told me she was moving in with the man she loves and handed me divorce papers." John turned pale, speechless. Mary looked horrified, realizing John had been unfaithful. "How long have you been lovers?" I demanded. "Were those afternoons I covered for you so you could be with her? I should get tested for STDs, given the women you've been with." Jan went even paler. "This isn't the time or place to discuss this," he said quietly. "Screw you. There will never be a right time for this." Go to the bank or put the business up for sale. We're done as partners and brothers. James, there must be another way. We need you, John pleaded. We can talk when you're calmer. In pure anger, I picked up his desk phone and called our mother, putting it on speaker. Mom, I have bad news, I said. Today is my last day. I'm resigning, effective immediately. John needs to buy out my shares. What she said shocked me. You love that business. What happened? Ask John. He's not in his office because his secret lover is moving in today. They're getting married after her divorce. You might want to visit and meet her. I hung up. JN was furious but couldn't speak. He had been bragging about his new love for months at family dinners. Mary, follow me to my office to ensure I don't take anything belonging to the company. I want a signed statement that I turned over all keys and only took personal items. John was visibly angrier as I openly expressed my distrust of him. Before leaving, I said, should I walk out backwards so you can't stab me in the back again? What you and Beth did is worse than if you had just shot me. We walked back to my office where my receptionist was working. Joanne, please come in, witness what's about to happen. Mary will appreciate having another witness, I said. James, what's going on? Joanne asked. I've quit because JN has stolen my wife and children, I replied. I was called home to be served with divorce papers. The movers gave me Beth's new address, which turned out to be John's. Both our long-term executive assistants were shocked. These wonderful ladies had been our support for years, and I deeply respected them. Let's list everything James takes and the keys he gives us, Mary suggested. We'll type it up, witness it, and make 5 copies. Joan and I will each take a copy home for safekeeping. Her suggestion showed their trust in the company president. It made me wonder what else my brother was hiding. It took about an hour to complete. I called security to escort me out and verify what I was taking. I watched as the ladies put the extra copies in their purses. JN had rushed out without saying goodbye, hoping to avoid the drama. Everyone saw the top 2 executive assistants escorting me out with tears in their eyes. I kissed them on the cheek and thanked them for their support. I stepped out, took the single box from the security officer, and left. As soon as I left, everyone wanted to know what happened. The ladies explained what they knew. I opened my trunk, threw the box in, and closed it. On my way through town, I stopped at a real estate office and listed the house. I gave the representative my wife's cell number, saying she would need her signature. I told her my soon-to-be ex would decide the list price. At home, I found only their personal belongings and our daughter's bedroom furniture were taken. I turned off my cell phone. I read the divorce papers. The grounds were emotional and mental cruelty. She was asking for primary custody of our daughters, Bayou and Bree, offering me supervised visitation once a month. Beth thought I was too strict because I wouldn't allow our 13 and 15-year-old daughters to date without a chaperone. She felt my old-fashioned views were too restrictive for today's society. I had argued that I didn't want our daughters to ruin their lives by getting pregnant in school. I wanted the best for them, but Beth thought my views were hurting their development. She felt I was treating our daughters like her father had treated her, and she had rebelled against him. Beth was going for my throat because of our differing views on parenting. I poured myself a stiff drink and tried to find something on TV to distract me, but only found outdated reruns. I must have passed out drunk because I woke up with a hangover on the living room sofa. I showered, shaved, and got ready for the day. After breakfast, I did my usual Saturday morning chores. Around 1 p.m., I turned my cell phone back on. I had messages from my mother, brother, wife, and daughters. I believe my daughters were in on what was happening and sided with their mother. The only message I trusted was from my mother. The rest didn't matter to me. I listened to the messages, then deleted them. My wife's message said we could reach an agreement once I calmed down. The real estate agent called me. Mr. Tate, your wife finally showed up this morning, but she was not happy, Miss Waterston said. She was shocked you're including the furniture with the house. After seeing comparable homes, she agreed to add $20,000 for the furniture. Thank you for the update, I replied. I want it sold quickly because it holds too many memories. She broke down, not expecting you to do this, Miss Waterston continued. I asked her, what did you expect? You left him for his brother. She was surprised about you demanding to be bought out from the family company. I just want to get away from them, I said. In the divorce, she's trying to take the kids completely from me. She seems shocked. I told her she might fool others, but I know how people like her think. Miss Waterston, I've arranged for a good divorce lawyer. I'll text you her details, I said. I thanked her and hung up. Just then, I saw my sister Connie's car pull in. I finished making my coffee and went to let her in. It must be important for you to drive halfway across the state, I said. Mom was devastated when she found Beth and your daughters at JN's place, Connie said. She couldn't believe it. How long has it been going on, I asked. Mom found out from Beth that it's been about 2 years, Connie replied. How could I have been so blind, I said. Before we talk more, read the divorce papers. I'll get you some coffee. Connie read the papers, noting how exaggerated everything was. Beth wants you out of your daughter's lives, Connie said. Most of her claims are nonsense. Mom doesn't want you leaving the family business, so Mom wants me to accept being John's cuck and cow, I asked, noting Connie's shock. Oh my God, Connie swore, surprising me as she never used foul language. How do I explain this to Mom? Connie asked. She won't understand the full betrayal. Mom might see the infidelity and breakup, but not why I'm leaving the company, I said. I can't stay knowing John turned my wife and children against me just to keep Mom's approval. Your husband makes business deals, he could find a buyer for the company. John has left you no choice. You have to write him out of your life, Connie said. He knew what he was doing, and it was deliberate. Connie called her husband, explaining everything. When she hung up, she said, He'll have a team appraise the company Monday. I need to convince Mom it's the best solution. I pulled out the last 5 years of financial records and handed them to her. Your husband will need these, I said. What about BU and Bree? Connie asked. That's up to Judge Donald McDonald. I wanted Dale Britton, but he's tied up with a big case. Her lawyer is painting an ugly picture, I said. Connie and I talked briefly before she left to speak with our mother. I didn't sleep well that night, missing my wife beside me. I decided to leave town for a few days after meeting the lawyer, needing space to think clearly. Connie called after she and Mom spoke with the pastor. He said, The one who has been injured the most may never get over it. What they did to him was despicable, but common today because love and decency have lost their value. They are just tools to manipulate and control others. Mom was shocked when the pastor said, James isn't the first to be destroyed by family and won't be the last. Mom agreed to sell the business, Connie explained, not because of what John did, but because she knows John would ruin it without you. She wants to know who should take your place. Does she understand I consider John dead to me? I asked. Yes, and why? Connie replied. I had to explain what being a cuck means. Mom swore she'd liquidate Beth if she saw her again. Tell Mom to appoint Carl Robertson as president. He knows everything I do and can prevent John from overriding him. It's essential for getting the best price for the company. Mom needs to demote JN publicly, I said. Should we warn John? Connie asked. No. If Mom can't do it, she should appoint you as CEO until the company is sold. I must stay out of it to avoid it being used against me in divorce court. Connie agreed to check with her husband and later texted, I'm the new CEO. I'll implement your suggestions tomorrow. I was having brunch when Beth called. This time I answered. Can we talk? Beth asked. No. If you or your lover contact me again, I'll file maltreatment charges. Everything will be settled in court, I said. We need to discuss BU and Bree, Beth said. There's no reason for you to leave the family business now. We'll sort this out in court, I said. I'm requesting paternity tests to determine if they are JN's or mine. We all deserve the truth, and I'll never return to anything involving it, Beth gasped. They're yours, and you know it. I thought I had a loving wife until Friday. I was wrong about that, so I must consider I might not be their father either. John could have been deceiving me for years, I said. Beth started crying, but I hung up. I then called my former assistant, Joanne, for advice from her husband, David, who had gone through a tough divorce. David arrived, read the divorce petition, and I explained everything. Let's be clear, David said. You don't know. When the affair started, other than hearsay. Yes, that's true, I said. In court, you'd be justified in requesting paternity tests due to the family situation. The way you found out implies long-term deception. Judge Donald McDonald will need biological proof before making any rulings, David said. Is the judge that strict? I asked. Yes. My divorce took 6 months, but his rulings prioritized our children's needs. It was tough, but ultimately he made the right decision, David explained. I offered David a drink, and we were chatting about his relationship with Joanne when a truck pulled into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw it was my brother, John. That dares to show up here after what he did, I said. I wish I had one of Dad's 22 seconds. David said, sit down, I'll handle this. If he won't leave, I'll show him my badge. He doesn't want to deal with the Cape Girardeau police. He opened the front door and lowered the screen window so I could hear their conversation. John slammed his truck door and yelled, Where's my stupid brother? I told him we could work it out, but he wouldn't listen. Now he has to, because I need to straighten him out. If he won't listen, I'll shove my fist down his throat. No, David said. Go home and cool down before you do something you'll regret. Screw you. Get out of my way. I left Beth in tears because he's questioning the paternity of daughters. He needs to be straightened out, and I'm the one to do it. So when did the affair start? David asked. Years ago, if it's any of your business, John replied. Interesting, because Beth told your mother yesterday it was years ago, David said, showing his badge. I have to wonder what the truth is, since both of you are making the other look like a liar. After making James an unknowing cuck, you expected him to accept it and carry on as if nothing happened? Was it your plan to break him and make him your submissive? What gives you the right to think your brother should do as you say? John was stunned into silence, revealing they hadn't planned this out. David added, I wonder what the judge will say about this recorded conversation. I suggest you get back in the truck and prepare Beth for the paternity test. Your story lacks credibility, and any further explanations will be seen as more lies. I watched John walk back to his truck, realizing things were not going as planned. David waited until John drove away before coming back inside. What's your lawyer's name? He asked. I'll contact her on Monday and send a copy of this recording. I gave him the details. Why did you bring your police cam? I asked. It's standard in domestic situations, David explained. When Joanne told me why you needed to talk, I knew anything could happen, so I came prepared. Let Joanne know I'm leaving town after seeing the lawyer, I said. It's best I stay away for a while. Is it anything the cops might be called about? David asked. Our older sister is now the CEO of the family company. Tomorrow she'll appoint Carl Robertson as president. My brother will be demoted to vice president, I explained. This is happening why? David asked. Mom doesn't want my brother destroying what my father and I built before she finds a buyer, I said. I agree with your reasoning, David said. You should be packed to leave right after your lawyer appointment. John will see it as all you're doing. From what I've learned, he's hot-headed and reacts without thinking. He could do anything. After David left, I cleaned up the kitchen and went to Ace Hardware for a new lock set for all the doors. It took 2 hours to install. I was about to change the house security system code when my phone rang. It was Beth's father. What's going on, James? Beth's father asked. My granddaughters have been calling from an unknown number because Beth confiscated their phones and yours is never on. Did you ask Beth why? I asked. She says it's personal and will explain later. Katie and I want answers now. Beth moved out on Friday, I said. She called me home as the movers finished and served me divorce papers. She said she's in love with another man and that his name doesn't matter. Are you serious? He asked quietly. Yes. The movers gave me her new address because Beth wouldn't. She moved in with my older brother. They've been in a relationship for 2 to 5 years, depending on who you ask. She doesn't want me to have any contact with Bu and Bree and is asking for 1 hour a month supervised visits. Why would she do that? You've been a great father. She probably doubts I'm their biological father. My lawyer will request DNA tests to confirm. Also, I'm no longer involved in the family business. It sounds like she knows who their real father is. What should I tell my granddaughters? Tell them the truth, which they haven't been getting from their mother. After we said goodbye, I reset all the codes. Then I went to Golden Corral for a bite. I had just left the lawyer's office at 11 a.m. She agreed it was a mess, but thought the video David sent would undermine the plaintiff's credibility. She believed their stupidity had put me in the driver's seat. I had canceled all of Beth's debit and credit cards and removed her from all bank accounts. My next stop was the real estate office to give them the new house key and access code. Then I hit the road south. About an hour later, Joanne called. Just checking you're on the road, she said. Connie just walked in to meet Carl Robertson. I left about an hour ago after dropping off the keys, I said. Heading south with no particular destination. We'll call to update you, Joanne said. Text me first so I can pull over, I replied. I stopped at a rest area and finally let my emotions out. After a while, a police cruiser pulled in. The officer got out and approached me. I saw you pull in 2 hours ago and got concerned, he said. I've been through a lot emotionally and decided not to drive, I explained, going through a divorce. He asked with a knowing smile, Yes, how did you guess? The road south with no destination is a common choice, he said, handing me a cold soda from his cooler. We chatted until a text message came in. Need privacy, he asked. No, you might find this interesting, I said, putting the call on speaker. How did it go, Joanne? Carl accepted the president position temporarily, knowing it was your suggestion, Joanne said. He and Connie informed John of his removal. John didn't take it well and refused the vice president position. Carl told him, I guess you've decided to quit. Let me call security to escort you out. John cursed and blamed you for everything. So my brother is unemployed like me, I said. That must hurt his pride. Off the record, James, I think that was Connie and your mother's plan all along, Joanne said. Expect a call from Connie shortly. The police officer saw me smile as I began to explain my wife of 17 years left me for my brother last Friday. I resigned as vice president from the family business and demanded they buy out my shares. They didn't see it coming. I had just finished explaining when Connie called, so I put her on speaker. "When can you get back here?" Connie asked. "Why? It sounds like you have everything under control," I said. "Carl is perfect for the job. My husband lined up financing so you can buy John's shares. Mom wants him out. He'll use a business loan for it. Carl agreed to be vice president if you return as president." "Fine. I'll meet you at Mom's around 6 tonight," I said. "Tell Joanne to order new office furniture and repaint the offices. If she gets it right, I'll give her a 10% raise." We said goodbye, and I smiled. "What's the name of your company?" the officer asked. "Parish Electrical. We're in about a third of the state and always expanding." "Your logo is 'No job is too big or too small,'" he said. "That's right. It was my dad's favorite saying," I replied. We talked for a bit more. He gave me his business card and directions to reverse my rot. I appreciated his kindness as he followed me out. Back in town, I noted his card's details before heading to my parents' place. Around, my mother met me at the door, and we shared a quiet moment. Connie was at the airport, picking up her husband. Mom and I chatted until my phone rang. It was Beth's father. "Hi, Dad, what's up?" I answered. "Have you heard rumors about your brother in the workyards?" he asked. "Let me step out before I answer," I said. "Yes, but I've seen no proof. Why?" "He has illegal videos on his home computer. Bayou and Bree found them and called us. They're scared to be near him. We picked them up from school, but I don't know what to do. Call Joe, explain, and say you're giving the kids sanctuary. Use a throwaway phone to avoid detection," I advised. "Why call Joanne?" he asked. "Her husband's a cop. He'll handle it," I said. "Thanks for helping. My daughters, text me your number." I talked to my daughters until my mom said the police wanted to speak with me. I ended the call and texted the number to my mother-in-law's phone before clearing my messages. "David, good to see you. What's up?" "Your daughters are missing, and your phone was busy. Beth filed a kidnapping complaint against you." I looked at my concerned mother. "When did they disappear?" I asked. "After school at 2:30, David said. I handed him the state trooper's card. "Call him. You'll understand." David called, and my mother saw his relieved smile as the call ended. "I should have known," David said. "You have the perfect alibi. You were an hour away, sharing a soda with another officer when your daughters disappeared." David then received 5 text messages in a row and stepped outside to make a call. When he returned, he asked to speak with me privately. We went into another room and closed the door. "What do you know about the rumors about your brother?" he asked. "People say he likes them younger than he should," I said. "I always kept my girlfriends away from him because I had suspicions." "Why?" "Your daughters found something disturbing on his computer. They told someone at school and are now in sanctuary while we investigate," David said. I sat down, head in hands. When I reconnected with Beth at 17, she ran with a wild crowd. I picked up my drunk brother that night, and she asked for a ride home. I wonder if John was her date. "I wish you could prove that," David whispered. "Tell your daughter's protectors we won't charge them. I need a few days to resolve this. Your mistake was giving them my wife's number." "It's Beth's parents." "I had no clue," I said, "but I told them to use a disposable phone." David laughed. "Be thankful for carrying in-laws. I'll get a warrant for your brother's computer and might need your daughters to testify." We returned to the living room, and I escorted the officers to the door. Just as I opened it, Beth walked in. "Are you arresting James for kidnapping?" she asked. "No," David said. "He has an alibi. He was with a police officer when your kids disappeared." Beth's face turned white. "Maybe the girls ran away because they don't want to live with you," I said. "David, should I go home in case they show up?" "Smart idea. They can decide where they want to live," David said with a grin. "Call me if they show up." After the officer left, I turned to Beth. "Was my brother your date the night I gave you a ride home when he was drunk?" Her expression confirmed it. "I guess I know how long you've been with him." My mother, furious, yelled, "James, throw her out now! If I see her again, I'll use one of my husband's rifles." "Run, Beth," I said. "She might shoot you now." Beth fled in fear. I couldn't help but laugh. "Well played, Mom," I said. She believed it. "I meant it," she replied. I called Beth's father. "Can you bring Mom and the kids to my mother's for dinner?" "Are you serious?" He asked. "We're celebrating my daughter's return. No more problems with Beth or the police." "We're on our way," he said. "Mom, the girls need to stay here until I can get furniture. Is that okay?" "Why don't you all move here until the divorce is final?" Mom suggested. "I'll take them shopping for new clothes tomorrow." "Sounds good to me," I said. "Make sure they get new cell phones." Beth took theirs to prevent contact with me. Mom informed the kitchen staff about the extra dinner guests. I brought in my suitcases and suits. Mom showed me my room. Beth was not happy. She was worried sick about her daughters and was sure James had taken them. She was proven wrong, and her true relationship with John was exposed. John had taken her pureness before she reconnected with James. After their second daughter was born, John decided he had to reclaim Beth. She resisted for a long time. One Wednesday afternoon, while James was on a business trip, J.N. showed up at their house. He took her in his arms, kissed her, and soon they were having lovemaking. John declared loudly that he was claiming Beth as his woman. She allowed him to take her 3 times that afternoon, engaging in raw, animalistic lovemaking. Afterwards, John whispered to her that he had always loved her and felt complete only with her. That night, she found him unclothed in her bed, and they made love until they fell asleep. Thursday, after sending the girls to school, they had lovemaking all day. On Friday, J.N. came back and reinforced his claim over her. She admitted she was owned by him and showed her submission by giving him a head before James came home and kissed her deeply. Beth believed she would have gotten pregnant by John if she hadn't had her tubes tied 6 months ago. After almost being caught by her eldest daughter, John decided they should move in together. They thought James would accept their relationship after some time, but he didn't. Instead, he caused a storm, resigning from his job and questioning the paternity of his daughters. John returned home one afternoon to tell Beth he had been pushed out of the company by their new CEO, his sister. They realized they had unintentionally destroyed James's life. Now they faced the consequences of their actions, including societal judgment, branding James a cuck. Even Beth's parents were ignoring her calls and texts. She needed to bridge the gap with James and start talking. She called him to ask if he had heard anything about their daughters. James answered on the 3rd ring. "James, have you heard anything about the kids?" she asked. "No, but I don't think you need to worry," he said. "Why do you feel that way?" she asked. "Because if they are as lucky as you, they'll be picked up by a man like John, who will train them to be eager and willing just like he did to you." Beth ended the call and sat crying in her car. James had cruelly pointed out how people probably viewed her relationship with J.N. He had always feared his daughters would become easy and saw John as someone who always had a woman. In James's eyes, J.N. had just moved the biggest one ever into his home. Beth felt ashamed, used, and owned in a way she had never experienced before. She realized how different James and J.N. were. James wanted her to be a better person, filled with love and quality. John wanted a classy woman who would fulfill his desires. She had abandoned her morals and principles, and now everyone knew it. At my mother's place, we celebrated with my daughters. Beth's parents and I shared hugs, relieved after 4 trying days. The girls were delighted to see Aunt Connie and Uncle Tom. During the meal, we discussed our temporary plans until the divorce was finalized, which the girls were happy about. We decided to leave business matters for the next day. Beth's father and I took a walk to talk privately. "James, how long has my daughter's relationship with your brother been going on?" he asked. "Since the first time I brought her home from a wild party my brother was attending." Beth admitted that John was her date that night, I said. His eyes teared up. "Then why did Beth start chasing you?" "I believe John and Beth weren't serious back then," I said. That night, she saw me differently. Our early years of marriage were good, but John started desiring what I had and began chasing her. J.N. was always more aggressive. "Your father told me John felt he was always trying to live up to you because your standards were so high." "I never knew that," I said. "It's sad." John dragged Beth down with him. "The police will seize his computer this week. If they find what we suspect, Beth will get supervised visitation of her daughters." "She deserves it," Beth's dad said. "Some people have to learn the hard way." I arrived late to the office Tuesday morning, enjoying reconnecting with my daughters. My mother was thrilled to have a girls' day out with her granddaughters. At the office, employees lined up clapping. Carl Robertson, Mary, and Joan all shook my hand. I told Carl we'd redo his office after finishing the president's office. The newspaper announced my appointment as president and Carl's promotion to vice president, noting John Tate was no longer with the company. The phone started ringing with new business opportunities, most because John was no longer involved. It made me wonder how much business he had cost us over the years. I left the office to pick up the rest of my clothes from my former home, knowing Mom and the girls were still shopping. While loading my car, John attacked me from behind. The last time we fought, he had stricken me badly. I grabbed a tire iron and struck his leg, making him release me. A neighbor called the cops, who broke up the fight and arrested John for being the aggressor and drinking. I collapsed and woke up in the hospital with cracked ribs, internal bleeding, and bruises all over my body. My mother said I looked like a character from Soylent Green. John was charged with aggravated assault. My daughters were emotionally upset by my condition and what had happened. "Bayu and Bree, what happened to me was because your mother and uncle acted on their emotions without thinking," I said. "People like that lose their ability to see things clearly, making their situations worse. I'll recover, but they may not. The girls and my mother stayed with me until I fell asleep. The next morning, Connie, Mom, and Tom visited to get the loan. Tom wanted us to expand north. A competitor had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and Tom suggested we take over their contracts and make a low offer on their equipment and buildings. Why not just buy controlling interest in their shares? I asked. Tom explained that their debt was too high, and we'd be stuck with costly union contracts. Mom then surprised us by saying James has effectively been running the company for years. I want to give him 27% of the shares to have complete control, because we can't count on JN agreeing to sell. The rest goes to Connie. Thanks to James's investment skills, I have enough to live comfortably. Does anyone object? She asked. I do, I said. I'll agree if Tom becomes our CFO. He may take a pay cut, but that's the sacrifice. Connie teared up because our father had never accepted Tom. My offer meant everything to her. I'll even cover your moving costs and house purchase if you say yes. Tom, flabbergasted, shook my hand and said, I'd be honored. Mom was thrilled her daughter was moving home. After they left, I called Carl to discuss our plans. He mentioned that the assets and contracts we were pursuing had political support. I stressed that if the court accepted our offer, we needed to act quickly. I was released from the hospital on Friday. Mom picked me up and drove me to my house to pack. Connie would arrive the next morning to house hunt. My body was healing, and my lawyer had secured restraining orders against Beth and John. Beth's parents had visited 3 times. It's been a quiet few days, Mom said. It gave the girls time to adjust. I've had to explain the consequences of people's choices. How are my daughters emotionally? I asked. They're handling it better than I would have, she said, but they need some private time with you. They have the whole weekend with me if needed, I said. I'll stop by the motor vehicle office for Bree's learner permit materials. Tom has given notice and completed the company's valuation. Connie will bring the report. His firm offered him a huge raise to stay, but he turned it down, saying his sign-on bonus was a new house. Tom has the knowledge we need for this growth, I said. Bringing him into the family business is overdue. Why wasn't it done before? Mom asked. The president wouldn't approve it, I said. When we arrived at my house, I thanked her and went inside. I found a letter from Beth in the mail and threw it away. It was too little, too late. How can someone be sorry for deliberate actions? I called a cleaning service to remove the food, clean the place, and shut off the water and equipment. I gave them the alarm code and said I'd drop off a key in 2 hours. It took about an hour to pack my clothes and personal items. Before leaving, I shaved, leaving a mustache and goatee for a new look. David called to inform me that John's place had been raided and his computer seized. John's lawyer was negotiating a plea deal. My daughters were already back from school at Mom's. They helped me move and unpack my clothes. Afterward, we laid on the bed and had a long chat. The topic of lovemaking came up. When you have loving just for lovemaking, it's to satisfy animalistic needs, I explained. Making love is about putting the other person first, strengthening the bond. What brought Uncle Jane and Mom together, Bu asked. Was it love or just physical attraction? Your uncle wanted what I had, I said. He let his desire grow until he acted on it. At first, your mother may have been overwhelmed, but she became attracted to its raw intensity. Each encounter reminded them of that first day, pulling them together. Eventually, their desire led to a long-term relationship built on lies and deceit. I worried I made it sound complicated, but Bree surprised me by saying, basically, they went for what the other was offering without enough morals to walk away. What do you mean? Bu asked. My red dress that you want so much, Bree said. I taunt you with it because I know you want it. That's what Mom and Uncle John did with their physical appearances. Bree left the room and returned with the red dress Bu wanted, handing it to her sister. She said, what I did was wrong, like them, but to a lesser degree. I'm sorry, sis, the dress is yours. I got up, opened the dresser top drawer, grabbed the booklet and tossed it to Bree, saying, start studying. You can get your learner's permit in months. Bree squealed with delight. Thank you, Daddy. My daughters were growing up and had learned an important life lesson. I was very proud of them. Mom asked what they wanted for supper, and they chose mac and cheese. We had a delightful meal with pork chops and baked beans. After supper, still weak and recovering, I went to bed early. Around midnight, Bu crawled into bed with me. As I cuddled her, I couldn't help thinking that Beth would have twisted this innocent moment into something inappropriate. Connie brought me a proposal for the bankruptcy court that needed my signature. If approved, we'd double our size. Carl and I reviewed and signed it. On Monday, Joanne sent it to the state capitol by courier. I informed Joanne she'd now earn annually, effective immediately. Later, Joanne closed my office door for a private conversation. David wants you to know what's going on, she said. You have my attention, I replied. The images on your brother's computer are of unlocal girls, Joanne explained. David suspects it's a trophy list of girls John took advantage of. including Beth. This can be used in your divorce to question his motives for wanting Beth to move in, implying he sought access to your daughters. I'm not surprised, I said. Workers had mentioned John's pictures of conquests. John was 23 when he was with Beth at 17, legally statutory assault. This pattern will help in my divorce, but we need to figure out how to use it. David will prepare an internal report, Joanne said. It will be up to the district attorney to decide on the charges. David will bring a copy home for you. Sounds good. Tell David I owe him one, I said. David was overwhelmed by your generosity, Joanne said. Mary has also been rewarded with a promotion to junior management. Connie's husband is joining as CFO. We need to find a qualified assistant within our staff. Once we pick her, we'll discuss her new responsibilities and use John's former office furniture for her setup. Why? We might double our size soon and go statewide. There will be days when management is tied up or out of the office, I explained. You and Mary, as executive assistants, will make decisions on our behalf, once fully trained, so we need to ensure we can trust the new assistant like you trust us, she said. Any issues with Mary and the new assistant will be your responsibility. If you need advice, you can always ask me, I said. Joanne left with a proud look. When I left for the day, Mary and Joanne were deep in discussion. Carl told me the new structure is brilliant. We're planning for the new openings. If our offer is accepted, Human Resources is compiling a list for relocation and promotion. Good thing I included a 30-day notice before acceptance to prepare, I said. Connie's husband Tom is joining as CFO. Without his financing arrangements, we couldn't have done this. John will be contacted about buying out his shares this week. Anything happening on the divorce end? Carl asked. We have a court hearing this week for the blood tests, I said. We were the last case called before Judge Donald McDonald that Friday. Contrary to his reputation, the judge was not a tall or broad man. He was about 5 feet 10 inches and 180 lbs, appearing to be in his late 50s. My lawyer explained the relationship between Beth, John, and me, detailing how Beth and I had reconnected and how I discovered her affair with my brother. She presented an affidavit from my mother, stating Beth admitted the affair had been ongoing for 2 years, and played a video recording from David, which caught the judge's interest. I explained what happened the day Beth accused me of kidnapping my children, and the judge looked increasingly concerned. Beth's lawyer tried to counter our claims, but struggled. The judge finally spoke. There's enough evidence to suggest an ongoing affair between Beth and John Tate, implying one brother may have tried to pass off his parentage on the other. A DNA test is the only way to determine the children's true parentage. The judge continued, John Tate's disclosures to the cop and his response are crucial. The divorce will be granted to James Tate on the grounds of infidelity. Beth was devastated, and John glared at me in rage. The judge implied they had been manipulating me for years. As we were leaving, I noticed Beth's parents and her older brother preparing to exit the courtroom, looking pained. When Beth approached them, they turned their backs on her, signifying that she was now shunned by them due to their religious views. I approached Beth with my lawyer. Beth, you must be proud. You've destroyed 2 families in less than a month. Bayo and Bree are doing well. As we left, Beth started to cry. Outside, her family waited for me. Mom, Dad, do you want the girls for the weekend? I asked. Mom hugged me, saying, we'd love to. Beth's brother Ted extended his hand. Good to see you, old friend. If my daughters don't tire you out tomorrow, I said, let's go out for a late supper and a few beers. I'm coming home for good, Ted said. 20 years is enough. I'm here to house hunt and find a job. My phone rang. It was Joanne. The 30-day countdown is on, she said excitedly. Thanks. Let Carl know I found the head for our resource department, if I can convince him to join us. How did it go in divorce court? Joanne asked. I'll explain when I get back, I said, turning to Ted. I offered, how about starting at $60,000 a year? After 6 months, you could be head of Parish's new resource department. Interested? What's involved? Ted asked. Managing purchasing, distribution, and inventory for 3 hubs. Supplies for retail stores and commercial sites will be delivered from these hubs, I explained. Of course, I'll take it, Ted said. James, Beth's dad added, show him your house. If he's interested, I'll cover his down payment. Ted and his wife decided to make an offer on the house at full price. I accepted, and all that remained was Beth's signature. Ted was amazed at how easily they could start over. I stopped at a wine shop and picked up 2 bottles of wine, cheese, and crackers before heading back to the office. The upper management team had a small celebration before calling it a night. My daughters called to ask if they could go with their grandparents for the weekend. I pretended to be surprised but said, go ahead and have fun. When I returned to my mother's, I told her about my day. Ted is getting a great deal on the house. The items you're including are worth more than they're paying. Ted's family will be well set up. No matter what Beth did, Ted will be diligent. You always take the high road, Mom said. Your father would be proud, just as I am. Thank you, Mom. It means a lot, especially since I'm still hurting because I still love her, I said. By the way, John sold his shares to me for $1 million through my lawyer, so I guess I'm staying on the board. What motivated him? I asked. He said he was never happy in the industry and stayed because it was family-owned. They're moving to Florida to develop property he owns there, Mom explained. I smiled, knowing our business was worth over $1 million according to Tom's report. We secured $15 million, spending $10 million to buy assets and contracts up north for pennies on the dollar. Tom believed we could recoup close to $7 million after streamlining operations. We would rebrand the fleet and use local contractors, incentivizing them with a 10% Christmas bonus, tax-free. This strategy had always improved customer satisfaction. Mom dragged me to a community fundraiser for a family raising money for their daughter's cancer treatment. There I met Dr. Tamara Braden, their doctor. I wasn't looking, but she caught my eye. I called our accountant and arranged a $50,000 donation to cover the medical bills. Tamara and I connected over our divorces. When I presented the PID and full receipt to the family, Tamara whispered, "I'm so impressed. I'm taking you home for dinner." I laughed and said, "Then you'll have to drive me home because I came with my mother." She laughed. "You can't be serious. That's my mother, Ruth, over there." I pointed. "Ruth Parrish. She's one of our greatest contributors." Tamara said, "I didn't know the company was named after her." Tamara smiled and asked, "What was wrong with the woman divorcing you?" "She got involved with a man with no morals. It's sad because they're both going down." Ted's wife approached us saying, "Tamara, if you need me to start early, I can. I'm not going back with Ted. The kids and I are staying." "James, what are you doing here?" Jackie asked. "I was just talking to Tamara," I said. "My mother's over there watching me." "How do you know James?" Tamara asked. "He's divorcing my sister-in-law and will be Ted's new boss. He gave us a great deal on his old house," Jackie said. "Why?" Tamara asked. "No matter what Ted's sister did, Ted is family," I said. "If you need any furniture, I have some you can have," Tamara offered. "Ted's parents bought the kids' bedroom furniture this morning," Jackie said. After the sale was confirmed when Beth signed the agreement, Ted and I let the ladies talk and walked off. "Beth is really struggling with depression," he said. "I told her she did it to herself, but everyone else is hurting too, even your daughters. No one understands why you did it, not even you, Ted. She doesn't know it's going to get worse for her before it gets better," I said. "John's past behavior is going to become very public. Take it easy with Tamara. She's a beautiful woman and is hurting as much as you." Ted said, "She's always been a keeper." Tamara took my hand and said, "Let's go. I promised you dinner, and we need to shop for a few things." Mom watched us leave. Tamara handed me the keys and asked me to drive to Food City, a small grocery store known for its meat selection. She offered to let me wait, but I went in with her. "What's on the menu?" I asked. "Steak, salad, and dessert if you have." "Room," Tamara said. "Sounds good," I replied. "Let's get a couple of bottles of red wine to go with it." It was after midnight when I got home. Tamara and I had a wonderful evening and planned to meet again the following Saturday. I had the best night's sleep since Beth left. Mom dragged me to church on Sunday. Connie found and put an offer on a house. I told her to submit the purchase agreement to accounting for the check. The girls met their mother for lunch at the mall and later told me it didn't go well. They revealed I had met someone and hoped she would help me heal. They also told Beth what they found on John's computer. The first time she heard about it, Beth was devastated, knowing she lost the chance for sole custody of our daughters. The girls believed she was depressed. Meanwhile, the district attorney laid multiple charges of statutory assault against John. He informed the parents of John's previous sufferers that John had moved in a woman with 2 minor daughters. Most agreed to press charges to protect those girls. John was arrested the next day at home in front of Beth. She realized she would never get custody of her children. What her divorce lawyer wrote in the original petition was coming true for her, not James. 2 months after meeting Tamara, JN was out on bail. Beth and I finalized the divorce, with her receiving $4 million. She got no shares. DNA tests confirmed BU and Bree were my biological daughters. I got sole custody, and Beth had liberal visitation rights as long as it wasn't in John's presence. During mediation, I pointed out John might have wanted her to move in to access my daughters. Hearing this broke Beth. The money I gave her would allow for a quality life if invested properly. I provided her with names of 2 investment advisors. When the divorce was finalized, Connie and Tom moved back with their 5 kids. Mom was delighted to get to know them. She said her life was filled with more love than she had lost, and I saw the truth in that. Connie remained CEO. John's reputation was destroyed, and even his lifelong friends turned against him. His legal bills were mounting. My daughters believed their mother would dump him once the divorce was final. They were concerned about her depression. The takeover was progressing well. We caught up on the contracts delayed by bankruptcy and were ahead of schedule. Most contracts would end up costing less than agreed. We decided to rebate after the final payment was received. We cut labor costs by. I flew out to see the changes and new buildings we acquired. Excess properties were put up for sale at appraised value. Human Resources worked with former employees, and over half became contractors at our new retail locations. We gave them interest-free loans to buy trucks and equipment from us at wholesale prices, along with a QuickBooks accounting program. Ted's first major purchase cut our costs per item by due to increased volume and skilled negotiations. He reorganized our approach, significantly reducing handling costs, proving he was the right choice. Ted and Jackie loved their new home and were slowly personalizing it. Upper management was thrilled because write-offs and losses were cut by. We suspected those in power wanted the bankruptcy handled quietly to hide certain things, and we were the only offer. Tom hired his old firm to appraise our value. Due to our growth, Mom and I were preparing for a barbecue at her place, where Tamara would meet everyone for the first time. I picked up Tamara early so she could meet my daughters before the crowd arrived. Tamara looked stunning in a white dress with monarch butterfly embroidery. We shared a few kisses before heading out. We arrived at Mom's holding hands, and Bayu and Bree came over. Sensing my nervousness, Tamara said, "Relax." After introductions, Bayu said, "If you're my dad's girlfriend, he picked a good one." Tamara admitted she was as nervous as I was. The party was a success, and Tamara fit in quickly with my family. Ted, noticing, said, "Looks like you two are falling in love." He suggested we go dancing at Bias later, and I agreed. David informed me that the DA thought John would get at least 7 years due to the number of parents standing against him. "Joanne thinks Tamara is great for you, but worries you'll mess it up," David said. I joked, "Why do women always think it's the man's fault?" Tamara and I watched the swimmers by the pool, and she noticed my discomfort with my daughter's swimsuits. "You're old-fashioned," she said. "Was your father like that?" "Yes," I replied. "He wanted us to be our best and believed actions spoke louder than words. Sadly, that's what drove Beth away." "If my first husband was like you, we'd still be married," Tamara said, and we shared a kiss. Bree teased, "Cool it, Dad. She's not our new mom yet." I ran into the pool to play with my daughters, and Tamara watched us. Later, the girls took pictures and sent them to their mother, showing it was serious. The food was excellent, and I thanked the kitchen staff. Tamara and I were inseparable. We met Ted and Jackie at an Irish restaurant, danced until closing, and I walked Tamara to her door. The next day, we shopped before joining my family for dinner. Bu texted, "Where are you? We're waiting." Tamara and I arrived, and Bu said, "You got some explaining to do, Dad." I grinned, which caught my sister and mother's attention. I asked for champagne and glasses for everyone. Tamara had her hands behind her back, and my mother smiled, realizing what was happening. I announced, "Tamara and I got engaged this afternoon." The room erupted in joy. Bree sent a video to her mom, who later took an overdose of sleeping pills and never woke up. John and Beth blamed each other for their problems, realizing their relationship was based on lust, not love. Everyone took her self-destruction hard. At Beth's grave, Jan said, "I'm sorry for everything." I replied, "I don't believe you," and walked away. That night, John drank most of a bottle of Jack, then used his first weapon to end his life, leaving a note saying, "I'm sorry." A week before Labor Day, Carl, Tom, Mary, Joanne, and Lucy came in with cake and champagne. "What's the celebration for?" I asked. "We paid off the loan in full," Tom said. "We're debt-free, thank God," I said. "I never want another 6 months like the last." "It wasn't all bad," Tom said. "I'm looking forward to being your best man in 8 days, but I never want to hear you say, 'We had to get married.'" Everyone laughed, knowing tomorrow was 2 months along. I took nuclear revenge on my boss who cheated with my wife and then filed for divorce. A 20-hour journey from Singapore to O'Hare International with a layover in Taipei was barely better than economy class. Even on my birthday, I wasn't fazed by returning to Chicago for a tough meeting with our international stocks head and shares trading desk. What worried me was anticipating what awaited me at home. We landed just after 8:30 a.m., and I took a shuttle to the nearby Chicago Sheraton and Suites Hotel. Having booked the room the night before, it was ready for immediate check-in. After dropping my belongings, I showered and hit the gym. I worked out for an hour, then took a long, hot shower followed by a cold rinse to wake up fully. Despite the chilly April weather in Chicago, I endured the cold until my teeth chattered, then warmed up with hot water. Feeling refreshed, I went to the restaurant for an American breakfast I'd missed for months. After devouring pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, and sausage drenched in maple syrup, and 4 cups of coffee, I headed to my 10:30 appointment at J.P. Morgan on Dearborn Avenue. I took the elevator to the 8th floor, showed my ID, and was escorted to a small conference room. They kept me waiting for over 17 minutes, during which I didn't move a muscle. From my trips to Asia, I learned to show no fear or weakness. Joe Rutledge, VP of International Stock and Commodities Traders, and Samuel Young, our corporate lawyer, eventually entered. Their presence signaled someone was getting fired, and it was me. "Adam," Joe began without a handshake, motioning me to sit. The confrontation began. "What happened in Singapore?" Joe demanded. "We sent you to stabilize things, and you approved a $300 million purchase of a new company's stock with no solid data." "Yes," I replied. "Yes to what?" Joe's face reddened. "Yes, it's in my report. The CEO and management team are top-notch with 200 years of experience. The project, 50 years in the making, is confirmed by Deloitte and KPMG. The aquaculture project is technologically advanced and has real potential." "Then why is their share price falling?" he asked. "It went public at $17 a share and now it's $9.55 and you bought more." "Yes, because it will rebound. If it reaches $25, we'll profit significantly, Joe. We own 25% of the shares, making us the largest shareholder in the company," I retorted. "Because competitors are short-selling to sink the company or buy it cheaply. We need to stand our ground." "It's a failure," he said. "We need to trade on confidence and maintain a positive risk ratio." "It's all in my report," I reiterated. "Your report is wishful thinking," he said. "The council has approved my recommendation. You're out." Samuel offered me 3 months' salary and nearly 30 days of accrued vacation, totaling almost 5 months of pay. They also cashed in my stock options, bringing my total payout to nearly $800,000, but leaving me with a tarnished reputation and bleak job prospects. By 2 a.m., I had signed all the forms, rolled my 401k into an IRA, returned all company materials, and was escorted out. Standing on the sidewalk with an empty satchel, I felt like I might collapse. I rushed to catch a cab back to the hotel, imagining strangers watching me die on the street. In my room, I mixed whiskey with 7-Up and ice, a sacrilege I needed. I sat down to think. At 42, I was too young to retire but unsure if I could start over. I decided I needed courage. I bought a new laptop, installed the necessary software, and began working. I transferred $50,000 from savings and liquidated some investments, preparing to move over $1,200,000 into an offshore trading account called Blue Sky International. By 9 a.m., I ordered a hamburger and beer from room service. My phone had been off for 36 hours. Exhausted, I decided to relax, watch the news, and avoid dealing with everything. Eventually, jet lag caught up with me and I fell asleep. The next morning, I had an early breakfast and turned on my phone. It was flooded with messages. "Help Dad." "Mom is having a breakdown," from Dean and Katie. "What's going on with Jean?" From my dad, birthday wishes from Jean's parents, my kids, and Team Singapore, but nothing from Jean. It felt like I didn't exist. I caught the 8:30 flight to Springfield and arrived home to chaos. The living room was a mess with games, soda cans, and plates everywhere. The kitchen sink was clogged, and the dishwasher and trash can were overflowing. The laundry room was piled with dirty clothes. I spent 3 hours cleaning and organizing, noticing 2 empty wine bottles with different lipstick marks in the living room. Our bedroom needed fresh sheets and ventilation. The kids' rooms were dirty but slightly better. Finally, I went to my office to check the Southeast Asia aquaculture stock. It had dropped to $9.37, almost 2 points down for the day. Now it was time to see if I had the courage to enter the market. I called my dad. My mom had died 5 years ago from breast cancer. We talked about Jean. He said she seemed sad and depressed recently. She was heartbroken for no clear reason. I checked our bank transactions and home phone messages but found nothing unusual. After folding clothes, I checked for dinner options and found little. I reconnected the battery to my Audi A6, started it, and went to the supermarket for groceries to make Thai green curry and jasmine rice. I boiled rice with water, coconut milk, and ginger for flavor. I stir-fried chicken strips with zucchini, Asian eggplant, lemongrass, garlic, Asian basil, and cilantro. I added coconut milk, green curry paste, lime zest and juice, fish sauce, and a bit of sugar. I garnished the dish with spring onions, coriander, and basil leaves, set the table, and poured a beer. Jean arrived and the kids ran inside, excited to see me. I hugged and kissed them, telling them how much I missed them. Katie cried in my arms, and Dean, more reserved, hugged me too. Jean watched us with a wistful look, then kissed me gently. "Welcome home, Adam," she said without much enthusiasm. That smells nice. What is it? Thai green curry, I replied. Dean and Katie were curious. It smells really good, Dean said, hugging me again. Go clean up for dinner, Jean instructed. Afterward, she hugged and kissed me. You look exhausted, Adam. Why are you back so soon? I got fired, I admitted. She blushed, fumbling for words. We'll figure something out, but what about you? She seemed distant, more like an acquaintance than my wife. Are you okay? It's work, she said, trying to smile. The market's down and there's a lot of pressure at M. She gestured to show the extent of the pressure. The kids returned, and we gathered for dinner. I served the meal, poured wine for Jean and me, and Dean had Mountain Dew while Kathy had water. We ate together for the first time in 4 months. I shared stories about Singapore and team-building activities like dragon boat races and combat archery. After dinner, Dean and Kathy surprised me with a wrapped present. Happy birthday, Dad, they said, bringing tears to Jean's eyes. I kissed my kids as Jean exclaimed, Oh my God, Adam, I'm so sorry, I totally forgot. I resisted reminding her of the gold diamond earrings I got her for her birthday and focused on the kids. I opened my present, a Band of Brothers DVD set. I loved that show and had always wanted the collection. I kissed the kids again, our smiles matching from the joy of giving and receiving. Jean, embarrassed and remorseful, promised to get me a gift the next day. You don't have to, I said. Being home with my family is all I need. Dean and Katie hugged me again, saying, Love you, Daddy. We talked at the table for over an hour, but eventually the kids had to do their homework while Jean and I cleaned up the kitchen. What's going on, Jean? You're not yourself, I asked. She hesitated, then admitted, I don't know, Adam. I'm depressed. You've always traveled so much, and the last time was too long. We hardly lived the same life. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I feel lost. I hugged her, and after some resistance, she let me hold her as she sobbed softly. She was right. My job had kept me away for years. We had agreed to make sacrifices for an early retirement, but it was taking a toll. Jean suggested I spend time with the kids. I helped Katie with her homework, did the same with Dean, then tucked Katie into bed. Dean confided, Mom's not okay, Dad. She's crying and not doing much around the house. I think she's having a nervous breakdown. There were tears in his eyes. Please fix it, Dad. I nodded, though I had no idea what to do. As I went downstairs, I heard Jean on the phone. She ended the call abruptly when she saw me. Who? Was that? I asked. One of the girls from the office, she replied, looking defiant. She seemed angry but wouldn't discuss it. Exhausted, I checked the Singapore Stock Exchange. California was trading at $9.90, a slight increase. I went upstairs, waited for Jean to finish in the bathroom, then got ready for bed. When I reached for her, she tensed but then pressed against me. Please just hold me, she whispered. I held her for a long time, feeling something was fundamentally wrong. Was it the long separation? Had she fallen out of love or in love with someone else? Was she sick? These thoughts swirled until I finally fell asleep. I woke up at 4:30, feeling tired and sick. I went for a run and planned to buy melatonin to reset my body clock. After an hour, I returned to find Jean gone, leaving a note asking me to feed the kids and take them to school. I checked my bank account, saw the money from JP Morgan had cleared, and transferred it to my offshore account. I checked the CA shares, which were now trading at $8.99, slowly declining. I had to choose between fixing my marriage or securing my financial future. Could I do both? I spent time with Dean and Kathy, asking about their activities while I was away. They mentioned spending time with Jean's boss, Anthony Miller, and his daughter, Evelyn, doing things like miniature golf and movies. Dean noticed my concern and defended the time spent with Evelyn, saying they felt like one big happy family. I assured them I was glad they enjoyed themselves and proposed a summer vacation. They were excited, and I hugged and kissed them before driving them to school. Then I called George Tallis, my old mentor, to discuss my situation. George, still a registered broker, agreed to review the CA prospectus I sent him. Later, I stopped by a pharmacy near St. John's Hospital and saw Jean and Evelyn Miller leaving the hospital, looking distraught. They seemed deeply connected in their grief. I wondered if Jean or Evelyn was sick or if they were mourning a mutual acquaintance. The sight left me unsettled, but I proceeded to my meetings. At my first meeting, Julian Knowles said he'd discussed the CA investment with his club. At the second, Aaron Goldstein quickly agreed to invest $10 million after the paperwork. George called, saying he had interested investors, and we agreed on a sliding commission structure. I then called my dad to discuss the CA opportunity, and he decided to invest $100,000. When I explained Jean's behavior, he suggested it resembled someone in mourning. We ruled out her parents and siblings, considering her cousins were distant. Dad then gave me the number of a private investigator they had used for insurance fraud cases. I went home, California'd my contacts in Singapore and Southeast Asia for updates, and recreated the risk assessment profile for CA. The results matched my report: rational numbers, a solid management team, and an early-stage project. Importantly, the management team had invested their own money, strengthening my position. Everything was set for SGX to open, and I would start trading. While waiting, I contacted a private investigator, Clarence Williams, who had a slow Southern accent but a sharp mind. He required a $5,000 advance and would start the next day. I drank coffee, waiting for the time to pass. Dean and Kathy came home late from sports practice, and I spent time with them but explained my important business. Jean arrived, looking tired but more determined. "I bought Chinese food on the way home," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Are you working?" she asked. "Hi, Jean," I replied. No affectionate words came from her, so I didn't respond either. "I have to work tonight from about 7, okay?" I replied. "I have a present for your birthday," she said, handing me a small gift-wrapped package. The card read, "Happy birthday, Adam. Love, Jean." Inside was a bottle of Hugo Boss aftershave. I thanked her and she kissed my dry lips. We ate as a family. Dean and Kathy talked about their day, and Jean mentioned some changes during my absence, like her boss, Anthony Miller, converting his house into a shelter for misused teens. I was surprised, as I thought he was more of a country club type. "His wife, Lynn, started it before she died," Jean said. "He used to use empty houses he owned, but now wants a permanent establishment." "Why now?" I asked. She became impassive. "Now the opportunity has presented itself," she said, nodding. "That's a great idea." "Springfield could use it," I said, smiling. She smiled back, and we cleaned up together. Despite my pleasant expression, I sensed she was hiding something. After cleanup, I told her I was going to work in my office. With an hour before trading opened in Singapore, I sat at my desk thinking about my marriage and trying to keep my sanity. Jean and I had once been compatible in every way, but the past few years had been difficult due to my frequent traveling. Usually we planned for my return, leading to many honeymoons, but not this time. The situation made me angry. In Singapore and South Asia, many women sought relationships with foreign men for various reasons, and I was hit on daily. However, I turned them down because I was married to a woman I loved. But recent events made me question our relationship. Reflecting on any warning signs, I realized that aside from a breakdown in communication over the past few weeks, there wasn't much. But now, I had to focus on the work at hand. When the Singapore market opened, California was trading at $8.49. With over $30 million to invest, I cautiously began buying stocks. Despite my purchases, the price kept falling as investors tried to offload their shares. I suspected my old company was dumping shares. I kept buying, expecting the price to stabilize, but it plummeted to $5.61. With our $30 million, we bought over 10% of the shares, allowing us to appoint someone to the board of directors. I called George, and we celebrated over whiskey, an 18-year-old JP Weiser for me and a 10-year-old Bully Bourbon for George. Our purchases encouraged other investors to buy at the bargain price, and by the time I logged off, the price had climbed to $8.72, stranding short sellers. It was almost 2 a.m. I quickly cleaned up and went to bed, finally passing out from the melatonin pills. The next morning, I woke up late. Dean and Kathy were finishing breakfast, and Jean was on the phone saying, "Time is of the essence." She ended the call when she saw me. "Working, Jean?" I asked. She shrugged exaggeratedly and poured me a cup of coffee. "You must have been up late." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Did the trade go well?" she asked. I mimicked her shrug, keeping my worries about California to myself. "It's still early. We'll have to wait and see." "Okay." She kissed my cheek. "You look tired. I'll take the kids to school." She left, calling out to Dean and Kathy. They shouted, "Bye and love you, Daddy," as they left. I poured another cup and headed to my office, pleased to see the stock closed at $10.14 after a late rally. It was time to stabilize the stock away from hostile games. I washed my face and started emailing and making calls, first checking the Miller Real Estate website. It promoted its social responsibility program, New Horizon House, helping troubled teens. I found Anthony Miller's Facebook, filled with pictures of cars, vacations, and a recent corporate event photo with Jean holding his hand, looking at him instead of the photographer. It was curious, but not definitive. Jean's Facebook was mostly old family photos with nothing much recent. Evelyn's Facebook showed many pictures with Jean over the years, some with Anthony too, but nothing inappropriate. Her recent posts were cryptic about life and prayers. I called Clarence Williams to expedite the investigation, but he said it would take time. I called my father, who advised against jumping to conclusions and to let the experts handle it. He told me to be patient. I was torn. Should I try to fix my marriage, risking more heartache if I was being played, or do nothing and regret it later? I called a lawyer who advised that fixing the marriage was usually better than divorce. I had one more idea. I contacted a former colleague of Jean's, Chad, who owed me a favor. He agreed to meet for lunch at Red Robin. He walked in, looking every bit the realtor in his golf shirt, chinos, and Dockers. After small talk over burgers, I got down to business. "So, you're fishing for information, Adam?" Chad laughed. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm trying to understand something about Em. Something's been bothering me." Chad turned serious. Everything changed when Tony lost his wife to cancer. He lost his drive for a while, but his daughter took over and he eventually found his footing again. He looked at me shrewdly. "Your wife?" She became very close to him, often referred to as his office wife. I gestured for him to continue, my throat tight. I didn't see anything inappropriate, but office gossip can be cruel. "Tony, Evelyn, and your wife spent a lot of time together, but you weren't home much, were you?" I shrugged. We talked about it without adding anything new. Chad was about to leave when he remembered something. "Did you know Anthony was rumored to have cancer?" We said goodbye, and I called St. John's Hospital, asking for Anthony Miller's room. He was in the oncology ward. I paid for lunch and headed home with a lot to think about. That evening, I went outside with whiskey and a cigar. Jean joined me with a glass of wine. "Can we talk, Adam?" "Shoot. You went on the M website," she accused. "Why does it matter?" "Why did you go to the company's website, and I assume you've checked everyone's Facebook pages too?" She glared at me, daring me to argue. We'd been married long enough for me to recognize the signs. "What did you expect to find?" "Exactly what I found." "And what was that?" "Why are you questioning me, Jean? Social media isn't private." I laughed, and she blushed. "Evelyn said you checked her Instagram." "Really?" "Yeah." She tried to stay calm. "Why are you acting like this?" "How like this?" "Or why?" I blew smoke in her direction, knowing she hated it. She waved it away, spilling wine on her blouse. "Please stop, Adam." She began to cry. Normally I would have hugged her, but not this time. "Why are you crying, Jean?" "You're upsetting me with your behavior, Adam." She grew louder, but I let out more smoke. "Who are you?" I asked. She struggled for words. "I am your wife, Adam Carter." "That's who I am." I stepped back as she gasped and ran into the house. I finished my drink and went to my office. CA's stock was rising to $11.92. George and I agreed it was a trend, not a spike. I monitored the market, noticing CA was the only stock with significant upward movement. A JP Morgan team member admitted they dumped half the stock at 50 cents on the dollar. My former boss, Joe Rutledge, suggested holding the rest as the trend looked positive. We laughed. He hinted that JP Morgan might rehire me and fire Rutledge. That night I slept on the couch in my office. The next morning, I saw California closed at $13. The trend continued, and our investors doubled their money. If it reached $25, we'd see a 300% profit. I made breakfast, drank coffee, and called the kids to eat, ignoring Jean all morning. After dropping them off at school, I went to the gym and then to IHOP for a late breakfast. I made some calls and had a 2-hour meeting with George. When I got home, we discussed starting a combined brokerage with offices in Springfield and Chicago. George would work on the structure and equity while I developed a market plan. I was drafting the plan when Jean came in alone. I left Kathy and Dean at the Beckers for the night. "We need to talk." She poured me a bourbon and herself a glass of wine. We sat in the living room and I waited for her to speak first. "I don't know what you think I've been doing while you've been away, Adam." "I haven't thought about anything yet." "Well, you're being very disrespectful and ugly to me." "Is that how you feel?" I raised an eyebrow. "Disrespectful." She nodded, then apologized. "You're not home anymore. We're like two strangers." "So after 17 years, we're strangers because I've been gone for 4 months?" All the Skypes, texts, and phone calls didn't matter. "There was a lot of pressure on me, and you were far away." She wiped her tears. "But you're my husband, and I'm your wife, and that's all that matters." She stood up and walked away. I sat there, sipping my bourbon, wondering if she had lost her mind. I heard her on the phone, then the murmur of water from the bathtub. Later, she came downstairs wearing a gray dress, black shoes, and a string of pearls I'd bought her. "Go take a shower and get dressed," she said. "I'll make a reservation at Chesapeake Seafood Restaurant." I got ready in 15 minutes, ignoring my suspicion that she was on the phone again. At the restaurant, she had a gin and tonic, and I ordered a Singapore gin sling. We talked about the kids over Chardonnay and appetizers. She seemed unconcerned about me losing my job. "You're one of the smartest people I know, Adam. I believe you'll find a job quickly." She smiled at me. She had no idea our future depended on California. The evening improved as we discussed friends, parents, and everyday topics. When our main courses arrived, I ordered the captain's platter, and she had lobster. She treated me to wine, and we enjoyed each other's company. If she was having an affair, she hid it well. We finished our meal and went home. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Jean was making breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, and English muffins. We ate together, discussing chores around the house. After breakfast, she went to pick up Dean and Kathy. I was in the backyard when my phone rang. It was Clarence Williams. "Can you talk?" he asked, and my heart sank. We arranged to meet at a downtown coffee shop. I left my work, cleaned up, and met him. He waved when he saw me. He was nothing like I expected. Unlike the detectives on TV, he was a small, unassuming man, no more than 5 feet 6 inches, thin, gray-haired, and balding. He wore dark pants, a shirt, and an old sports jacket, and even his shoes looked like they were from Walmart. He probably drove a Toyota. However, his high-end cell phone didn't match his outward appearance, and his firm handshake revealed his true nature. He got straight to the point. "Mr. Carter, we didn't catch your wife at a hotel or in any secret meetings," he said, holding up a hand to stop me from interrupting. "But we have ample evidence she's been having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller, for at least 2 years. It's an open secret in the office. His daughter, Evelyn, knows and facilitates it. Your wife often left the kids with friends to spend weekends with him when you were away." His words hit hard and my pulse quickened. My hands clutched the table as if I were having a heart attack. Hearing the truth from a stranger was devastating. Clarence continued, but I could barely hear him. "Miller has been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer and has only a few months to live." "What?" I asked, trying to process. "He's undergoing therapy, but it's not working. He has metastatic pancreatic cancer." This confirmed what Chad had hinted at. Jean's behavior suddenly made sense. She was mourning the man she loved and trying to cope with his impending passing. I shared my thoughts with Clarence, needing someone to talk to. Clarence's next words confirmed my initial impression of his depth. Cheaters often try to minimize their actions by saying it was just physical, engaging. But that's nonsense, Mr. Carter. They're invested in the relationship. Women need to feel loved. Long-term affairs are about more than physical engagement. They involve sharing experiences, hopes, and dreams. They develop a personal language and justify their actions by finding faults in their spouses. I was devastated. My wife was in a relationship with another man, giving him her full attention and enjoying the good times without the burdens of daily life. He provided her with the excitement missing from our marriage. We talked more and agreed to pause the investigation while I considered my next steps. After he left, I sat and pondered my life. One thing was clear: my marriage was over. The idea of staying together for the children no longer made sense. As difficult as it was to face, I knew that many children in the U.S. live in separated or divorced families, and mine would be no different. I sipped my cooling coffee, feeling real pain inside. Jean and Miller would pay for this. I tried to muffle my emotions. Anger, hurt, and anguish wouldn't help. I thought back to my work in the Far East, where old-style executives viewed business and life in multi-generational terms, much like Southern Europeans. When two families went to war, there was no reprieve until one was wiped out. But I wasn't a triad leader or mafia boss, just an ordinary man living an ordinary life. I had no superpowers or omnipotent allies. I asked for more coffee and pondered how to get revenge on a dying man. As for Jean, it was simple: take everything she valued. First, I had to deal with Miller. He wasn't married to me, but he disrespected my marriage and family. My anger flared up again. At work, psychological evaluations revealed 2 traits: I was risk-averse and stubborn to the point of intransigence. These traits drove me now. I would retaliate regardless of the consequences, and not back down until one side was defeated, even if it was me. An embryo of a plan began to form. I called Clarence and asked him to find troubled women the Millers had helped. It was another fishing trip, but I was aiming big. In 2014, during a trip to Kenya, I joined a local team for deep-sea fishing in the Indian Ocean. I learned that to catch a marlin, you first catch small fish like bonito, use them as live bait, and then catch the marlin. That lesson gave me a plan. I drove home, did breathing exercises to calm down, and pretended I was in the same mood as before. Jean wasn't home, so I finished my tasks. Later, she returned with Dean and Kathy, and we grilled steaks and corn on the cob, made coleslaw, and warmed baguettes. I spent the day as a loving father and husband, but inside, I was a cynical fool. Cynical Adam decided Jean was doing damage control because her lover was dying. I was her backup plan. My time with Dean and Kathy was real, but my time with Jean was like a B-movie. Cynical Adam reminded me to keep this in mind during the divorce and when looking for new relationships. The next few days were strange, living a lie and watching myself play a role. On a positive note, George and I sorted out the new trading organization, registered it in Singapore, and transferred the CA portfolio. California was now trading at $16.33. I became paranoid. I added security measures requiring a fingerprint and password, encrypted all my files and emails, and always turned off my laptop. I deleted all emails not from George without opening them, uploaded needed files to the cloud, reformatted my phone, and re-uploaded necessary data. I researched other interesting stocks and contacted potential investors from JP Morgan, confident that the layoff nullified my non-compete clause. On Thursday, Clarence delivered the ammunition I was waiting for, a flash drive containing information on 14 women the Millers had helped. The handover happened at a different coffee shop due to my heightened paranoia. The flash drive included brief bios and old photos. 5 women still lived locally. 1, Leah, worked as an escort. I bought a cell phone, called her, and arranged to meet at a motel. Leah arrived on time, small, thin, and tattooed. "Show me the money," she said. I placed $200 on the bed and asked, "How do you feel about making a statement?" She initially refused. But when I clarified that I wanted information, she agreed to talk. Leah recounted her story. She left home after school, ended up on the streets, and began selling herself for food and lodging. After a traumatic incident, she was taken to the hospital and then to Mrs. Miller's house, where she stayed for 6 months before leaving due to boredom with the rules. I asked if she experienced bullying at the house. She hesitated, then asked how much. I offered $5,000. She negotiated skillfully, asking for $20,000 to help her and her daughter start anew. I promised her a job in Chicago if everything worked out. And her eyes lit up. "For real?" she asked, both hopeful and scared. I reassured her and we agreed on a plan. We exchanged numbers, with her saving mine under the name Jerry. Phase 1 was complete. At home, I maintained my facade and Jean seemed to buy it. She was too focused on the Miller Legacy project to notice much else. I gathered as much information as I could without raising suspicion. We cooked and ate together like old times. During breakfast, she mentioned she'd be busy with New Horizons House and that the grand opening was on Monday at 10. I already knew from the company website and social media. I feigned interest and subtly questioned her, learning the mayor and local media would attend. "Did they stop the chemo and radiation so Tony could feel well enough to attend?" she asked someone, probably Evelyn. She then sobbed slightly. "It's going to be a life-changing moment," she said. "Not if I can help it," I thought. My divorce papers were ready, awaiting permission to file. Illinois was a no-fault state, so it was a matter of irreconcilable differences. I started the day checking the SGX. Our stock had reached its issue price and was rising, a good start to Friday. I listened to WMA radio at 9:30, where Evelyn discussed the New Horizons House, praising its social responsibility and calling for community participation and donations. Then a hesitant caller broke the smooth narrative. Through sobs, she revealed, "Please don't believe the house helped anyone. It allowed Mr. Miller to misuse women." Evelyn denied it vehemently, defending her father. The caller continued, "He did, and more than once. I'm a strumpet now, thanks to your precious daddy. My name is Leah, and your father ruined me." The connection cut off, and the station went to a commercial break. When they returned, the host was torn between continuing the original interview and addressing the shocking revelation. Evelyn tried to explain it away, but the lines were ringing with listeners' reactions. Some defended Leah, while others dismissed her as trying to make a buck. Another caller, Rita, said, "Anthony Miller misused me too," adding more fuel to the fire. A married woman with children called in, sobbing that Miller had stressed her too and forced her to do things she couldn't refuse. She disconnected, leaving a long silence before the host, who sounded like he was crying, could speak. The public reaction was a mix of outrage and defense, turning a low-interest story into an emotional storm. I called Vicky, an old high school friend who works at the local newspaper and anchors the news for 2 regional radio stations. I asked if she had heard about what was happening on WMA and WTX. She had. I told her I was concerned because my wife works for MRE in the New Horizon Home Project. She wasn't sure but said she would look into it, noting that if true, it would be the biggest misuse case in Springfield in 2 generations. By lunchtime, the story had quieted on the air, but social media and Twitter went wild. Initially, opinions were split evenly, but soon it became a fierce witch hunt against Miller. Thousands of women shared their misuse stories. Some were detailed, others just Me Too, and some were graphic. The information went viral globally. I passed out with a massive headache, took Tylenol, and feeling dirty, took a shower where I broke down, crying harder than I had since my mom died. I realized I had unleashed a firestorm that was now out of control. Nietzsche's saying about becoming a monster by fighting monsters felt apt. All I could do now was hang on and pray. I picked up Dean and Kathy, made chicken stir-fry, and waited for Jean. She didn't come home, and her phone was off. We ate and played a board game. Jean finally came home around 10, looking devastated. "You heard?" She sighed. "Have you heard all the nasty things they say about Tony?" She collapsed into a chair. I handed her a brandy. "Yeah, sounds like your boss is a carnivore," I said evenly. "Where there's smoke, there's fire." "No, Adam, he's a good man. He would never do anything like this." Time to get to phase 2. "Jean," she looked up, "you don't know the man very well." "You don't know me," I pressed on. "You and I have no secrets. We're husband and wife, so you know what I'm capable of, just like I know you." I held her gaze. "You may know Miller as your boss, but who knows what he's really like?" Conflicting thoughts played across her face. "No, he's a good man. He would never do that. I would know." "How do you know, Jean? He's your boss, your co-worker. He could be hiding a million secrets. I always felt like he was hiding something. He's the kind of guy you wouldn't leave alone with your wife or daughters." She sighed and hesitated. "Has he ever tried anything with you?" She turned white, and I pretended not to notice. "No, never. How can you even ask that?" She tried to be snarky but ended up looking dumbfounded. "Because you're a pretty woman, Jean. If what they say about him is true, he must be very immoral." She burst into tears, staring into her glass of brandy for answers she didn't find. She finished it and went upstairs, tiredly saying goodnight to Dean and Kathy. I heard the shower running. I finished my cognac and headed to bed, pretending to be half asleep when she returned. She was talking to someone, probably Evelyn, mentioning nightmares several times. She questioned why there weren't more women speaking out, and acknowledged it wouldn't go away easily. She was right. She made a second call. "Hi, Tony," she said. I overheard snippets where she reassured him it was all a misunderstanding and would be resolved. I barely heard her move to the kitchen, but I caught her last words, "I love you too." I heard the microwave beep, and she probably snacked alone before bed. By the time she joined me, I was asleep. Saturday, I woke up first, made breakfast, and drove Dean and Kathy to sports practice. At home, I spoke to Vicky, who told me 4 women had come forward. Her sources said the mayor's office considered the project toxic and was distancing itself, as were civic associations. By mid-morning, the Attorney General announced a full investigation. I talked to George about business and my father about my marriage. He agreed it was irretrievably broken, but said Dean and Kathy would cope like many kids in the U.S. I called Jean. "Where are you?" "Evelyn, the company lawyers, and I are fighting these lawsuits." "Are you sure you should be involved?" I asked with concern. "The fallout could be significant." She resisted as expected. That weekend, M had less than 20% of its usual attendance at the show. By Monday, the phones were ringing with canceled orders, and the New Horizon opening was postponed. Monday, another woman came forward. She was married to a wealthy businessman and well-known in the community. She claimed Miller misused her twice during her 8-day stay at the house. She left her lawyers details for a class action lawsuit. By the end of the week, 5 things had happened. First, Miller was interviewed by the district attorney at the hospital, after which his condition worsened. Second, 3 of the 5 women testified to the police about assaults occurring about 5 years ago. Third, the media storm forced M to close its doors. Fourth, California stock passed $24, and I began selling shares, making back our original investment while retaining 2/3 of the stock. Fifth, my dad took Dean and Kathy out for the weekend. I bought a bottle of 2012 vintage Veuve Clicquot to celebrate with Jean. When I arrived home, I saw an M-branded BMW X5 parked next to Jean's Lexus. Inside, Jean was crying, and Evelyn was comforting her. "Ladies," I greeted them, grabbed 3 champagne flutes and popped the cork. I filled the glasses and handed them out. They stared at me in shock. "Salute," I toasted, drank half and burped. Then the shouting began. "Jean, you're divorcing me. I thought we were a family." Divorce papers lay open on the coffee table. "Evelyn, how could you, Adam? Don't you care about your wife? Don't you love her? Have a drink, Jean, celebrating the end of an era." I finished my champagne and reached for the bottle. "Evelyn, first of all, I could, and I did. Second, I stopped caring and loving her when she became your father's strumpet." I knocked over my glass and toasted Evelyn. "Let's drink to your father's legacy. I hope he lives long enough to stand trial so the world knows what a piece of crap he really is. She turned white and collapsed. I turned to Jean. Get yourself a lawyer. The kids will stay with my father until custody is established. Her eyes widened with fear, seeing a side of me she never had before. Evelyn dropped her flute, spilling champagne. They looked at me like I was a madman with a trigger. Care for champagne? I asked. No, you left me alone so long I needed human contact, Jean tried to justify but couldn't meet my gaze. I understand, I laughed humorlessly. And how do you manage that now? Evelyn attacked me again. How many women did you sleep with while you were away? Men always want their women to be angels while they do whatever they want. Don't think all men act like your father. Just because he ruined young women and marriages doesn't mean the rest of us stoop to his level. I stared at her, hoping she'd object. I leaned closer. Your father is a malfeasant, a criminal, a pig. He'll likely die before going to prison, but his reputation will be destroyed. His legacy project will never succeed. His money will be tied up in lawsuits. M will go bankrupt, and you'll have to change your name and move far away. She trembled and cried. I wished she was a man so I could unleash my rage. Evelyn, you probably helped lure these girls, like Ghislaine Maxwell did for Jeffrey Epstein. Her mouth opened in horror. No, it's all a lie. My father is a good man. I turned to Jean. You have 2 hours to pack and leave. If you're still here when I return, I'll call the press and invite them to interview you about your involvement. Screw you, she spat. I'll move out, but I'll hire a lawyer first thing, and then we'll see who gets what. 2 hours, I repeated. I drove off, but a few blocks away, the adrenaline caught up with me, and I had to pull over, gasping and shaking. After 15 minutes, I regained control and called my father. I told him about Jean's departure and asked him to keep Dean and Kathy with him. Jean could visit, but not be alone with them. We talked, and then I drove around aimlessly before getting gas and heading home. It was 10 by the time I returned. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of happier times. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't sleep. Socrates said that an unexamined life isn't worth living, but I avoided examining my psyche too deeply. I knew things had gone too far and couldn't be stopped. I feared what might happen if the situation went to court and decided to get Leah out of town to eliminate my direct connection. The next morning, I felt as tired as when I went to bed. After my morning routine, I had breakfast downtown and called the kids. They were fine, though Dean suspected something was wrong. Over coffee, I reached Leah. Did I deliver as promised? She asked. I confirmed she had. We arranged her flight to Chicago the next day. I had transferred $25,000 from my offshore account to one of George's, then to her new bank account. Leah was off to a job as a property management assistant set up by one of George's contacts. I was on my second cup of coffee when Vicky called. 3 women have sued Miller, seeking damages. The papers will be served on Monday. We talked for a while. She and the news editors were surprised by the timing and the way the story had unfolded, but given the current climate, it wasn't shocking. Once Leah, who claimed she was a courtesan, got publicity, others followed, similar to the Harvey Weinstein case. I spent the rest of Saturday with Dean and Kathy. I told them their mom and I were divorcing because she was having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller. Kathy didn't understand, but Dean did. She slept with Mr. Miller, Dad? I nodded sadly. Yeah, they've been together for a while now. Kathy cried while Dean remained unfazed. We went to the golf course with my dad and hit a few buckets of balls. Dean and Kathy used my old clubs and had a good natural swing. We had dinner at a Greek restaurant and then headed to bed. I returned to my quiet, lonely house and had another sleepless night. On Sunday, her parents called, hoping for reconciliation for the sake of the children. How can I reconcile with a woman who's been having an affair for years, I asked, especially with a maniac like Miller? They sighed, and I assured them it would be figured out in court. They were left with a shattered view of their daughter. Life went on slowly and painfully. Dean and Kathy moved back in with me, and my father moved in to help. My business gained momentum as George and I received positive feedback. Vicky informed me that a 4th woman had joined the lawsuit against Miller, but not Leah, which I found odd. I had a meeting with Jean's lawyers about property division. I'd set up investment accounts for Dean and Kathy's education out of our combined assets, so they couldn't be touched. My last paycheck and payments from J.P. Morgan went to my offshore account. Her lawyer suspected a golden handshake but had no idea how much. It was only a matter of time before they subpoenaed the HR documents. I offered Jean nothing, as she had a good job. She argued there should be at least $250,000 in cash and near-cash assets. I assured them it was lost on unprofitable stocks. Jean called it crap, but I laughed. Take the deal, Jean, or I'll fight until you run out of money for lawyers. I'll expletive you financially. "Why are you being such an idiot?" she asked. "I deserve half of whatever is left of our marriage. Go to your second husband and ask him for money. You had more of a marriage with him than with me. But hurry, he may not have any money left after those women get what they deserve." It dragged on for months. Jean's stance wavered from meeting to meeting. She claimed I made her relationship with Miller look more serious than it was, then blamed me for her behavior, then wanted to reconcile, and finally threatened to take me to the cleaners. Her lawyer said he'd get her back in the house immediately. I gave her my biggest grin. "Be careful, Jean, or I'll expose your complicity in this." She turned pale. "Try it and see what happens next." As I left the lawyer's office, I noticed Evelyn glaring at me. I smiled at her like one smiles at the walking dead. Her smile faltered. "You should have stayed out of this, Evelyn. You reap what you sow." 2 days later, Leah was $5,000 richer, and the local newspapers, Twitter, and social media were ablaze with revelations about Evelyn Miller helping her disgraced father, Anthony Miller. The DA's office faced criticism for not arresting Miller or taking action against his daughter. In a media briefing, the DA's office said the investigation was still in its early stages, but the press didn't hold back. And another storm erupted. The public, still reeling from the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein scandal, quickly targeted Evelyn. Miller was sued by 4 women, making me increasingly anxious and sleepless. Going to court was a huge risk and could derail everything. 6 weeks after my return from Singapore, the doorbell rang. It was Evelyn. "What do you need?" I asked bluntly. "Can we talk, Adam?" "No, I don't want to be associated with a malfeasant like you." I closed the door, but she rang again, begging to talk. "Where's your entitlement now?" I thought, but said, "I don't think so. You just want to record me." Or "I promise I won't." "Good." Her eyes lit up, but I stopped her. "Put your purse and phone in the car first." I set my phone to record. "Okay, talk." She looked unsure whether to stand or sit, but eventually sat on the edge of the couch. "I know it's you, Adam. You created this nightmare." I stared at her without emotion. "Stop it, Adam." I remained silent, and she changed the subject. "Your claims about my father are lies. They need to be disproved." I laughed. "There's nothing I can do. It's up to the court now." "Please, Adam, I know you can stop this. Now that your world has collapsed, you want my help. Where were you when your father was with my wife?" Her face reddened. "Oh yes, you were helping, making sure she agreed to be your father's strumpet." We stared in silence. Finally, she asked, "When will you be satisfied?" "Not until your family is completely destroyed, Evelyn." She shuddered. "There will be no stopping, no ceasefire, no peace." I spoke slowly, making sure she understood this wasn't a game. She realized the truth and fell silent, then surprised me by asking, "You want revenge on me? How?" She clasped her hands together, unable to meet my eyes. Staggering, she left and ran to her BMW. I watched her drive away, feeling both satisfaction and disgust at my cruelty. Though it was early, I wanted a drink. I spent the rest of the week in and out of law offices while working on new clients. George and I were completing due diligence on promising listings on the Hong Kong and Johannesburg stock exchanges. The 4 women's class action lawsuit against Miller was in full swing. The Millers, led by Evelyn and her attorneys, were trying to settle out of court. The DA struggled with prosecuting a man on his deathbed, so we waited. The Millers had been nearly cleaned out, and the women received over $2 million each. This effectively marked the end of M. I needed one more thing to complete my revenge. So I went to the hospital and entered Miller's room, looking official and walking as if I belonged there. No one stopped me. I wanted him to know who had ruined him and his legacy. He lived for 2 more days. Evelyn had him cremated, and only 5 people attended the small gathering, including Jean. She wanted to take Dean and Kathy with her. I told her, "I would see you dead first." "You would, wouldn't you?" she replied with a mix of fear and hatred, similar to Evelyn's last look. "You ruined him, didn't you? All because he and I had a relationship. You went crazy and ruined so many lives." She cried. I laughed harshly. "You planted the seeds, Jean. Why didn't you just tell me you wanted someone else? We could have divorced, but you chose to neglect me." She admitted quietly, "I loved Tony. He gave me what I needed. With you, I felt like your job came first. Then when we had Dean and Kathy, I felt even more neglected. I could have walked away, but I didn't. I played a recording on my phone. Was it worth it?" I asked. "No," Miller wheezed. "You ruined everything I worked for." "It's your own fault, Miller. I screwed you up big time." "How did you find out about me misusing them?" he asked. I started laughing uncontrollably. "I didn't know, Miller. I thought I was making it up, but now I see why those women pursued you. It all burst open with one little crack." "Screw you, Carter," he panted. Those women owed me. He tried to sit up. Jean collapsed to the floor in shock. I walked away, leaving her behind. When MRE sold assets to free up cash, I bought the house they were converting into New Horizon House for next to nothing. I announced I would turn it into a full-fledged shelter for misused women, renamed it Joy Carter House after my mother, and placed it in trust with my dad and the 4 women who sued Miller as trustees. They contributed to the project, and the media praised us. During the divorce, Jean got primary custody, and I paid alimony until Dean and Kathy turned 18. She could stay in the house, but had to contribute 50% toward the mortgage. Alimony for her was 0. When she accused me of hiding money, I threatened her, and she backed down. She became very cautious around me. We eventually divorced. I bought a 3-bedroom condo so the kids could stay with me. I had them almost every weekend since Jean was busy selling houses. I missed them when I traveled regularly to the Far East, but overall, life wasn't too bad. I laughed at myself. Things were tough, but manageable. Jean's relationship with Evelyn ended immediately after I showed her the tape of my confrontation with Miller. I also circulated an edited version of the tape with her father's confession. This took on a life of its own. Evelyn left a couple of months later, and I never heard from her again. I met Leah in Chicago, whose real name was Leanne Roxton. She had cleaned up and was enjoying her work. "Did you know?" I asked. "It was like an open secret," she said. No one admitted to the misuse directly. Everyone was afraid being kicked out on the street would be worse. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She laughed. "I had no idea. I wasn't misused. I contacted a few women, offered them $5,000 to say they were misused." She glared at me, daring me to object, but I didn't. Rita French, the second woman I contacted, fell apart on the phone. She was the first to call the radio station when Miller's daughter was on air. The Me Too campaign started organically from there. "You could have made so much money," I sympathized. She shook her head. "By the time they sued Miller, I was in Chicago and out of the loop. But you gave me a good start, Adam. Thank you." My revenge was complete, and my actions felt justified. The Millers were destroyed. Like in a fictional saga, I learned lessons in revenge and executed them in ways I never imagined. Financially, things were improving. The business was growing, and George talked about me buying him out for his retirement. Dean and Kathy adjusted well, focusing on school, friends, and sports. Life went on. About 4 years after the divorce, Jean began dating an older man. They eventually married. Dean and Kathy said he was a nice guy. I remained single and wasn't seriously dating anyone, likely due to lingering trust issues. At my father's insistence, I started seeing a trauma counselor and began improving my life, but I still had a long way to go.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Tiffany has always been my constant, my North Star. We met in kindergarten, of all places. I can still picture her with those wild curls and that big, toothy grin, chasing me across the playground. She was fearless even then. I never imagined that same girl would become my world. We went through everything together: school dances, late-night study sessions, those awkward teenage years. When it came time to pick a university, there was no question we'd go together. She chose arts and history. Naturally, Tiffany has always been about storytelling and connecting the dots of the past. I went into science. It was the logical path for me, and honestly, I think it intrigued her how different our worlds were. She'd joke about how I'd end up wearing a lab coat while she'd wear a beret, scribbling poetry in a cafe somewhere. After university, we took our first real steps into adulthood. I landed a job at a pharmaceutical company, a big one. The kind of place that felt overwhelming and exciting at the same time. It was everything I'd worked for, but there were moments when I felt like a small cog in a massive machine. Tiffany, on the other hand, walked into her dream job at a magazine publication. I'd come home tired from meetings and data analysis, and she'd be buzzing with stories about her latest feature or some quirky artist she interviewed. Our lives have started to feel like two parallel tracks, running close but separate. We still have our late-night talks, where she curls up beside me with a cup of tea and asks me to explain some obscure science fact she read online. And I love hearing about her world, so full of creativity and color. She lights up when she talks about her work, her dreams, her plans for the future. At first, I was proud of Tiffany for how quickly she adapted to her new job. She worked hard, made a name for herself, and even found a group of friends who seemed to really click with her. But as time went on, I started noticing the shift in the way she talked and the people she surrounded herself with. Most of her new friends were these so-called liberal feminists, always ready to talk down about men as if we were some kind of plague on society. It wasn't just a few offhand comments either. They seemed to genuinely despise men. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt at first, thinking maybe I was misjudging them, But after a few interactions, my patience wore thin. These women would say things that were outright ridiculous, like how a wild bear would be a better companion than a man. I mean, come on. They'd laugh as if it was some kind of inside joke. But the venom behind their words wasn't hard to catch. I couldn't help myself when the conversations turned to their anti-men rhetoric. I'd ask pointed questions, ones they clearly weren't ready for, and watch as their smugness crumbled. I didn't enjoy humiliating them, but I also wasn't about to let them treat me like some kind of inferior species just because of my gender. Tiffany hated it when I spoke up, though. She'd give me that look, half frustrated, half embarrassed, and try to smooth things over. "They don't mean it like that," she'd say later, as if I wasn't fully aware of the tone and intent behind their words. But how could she not see the problem? These weren't just harmless jokes. They were tearing men down, and I was expected to sit there and take it. The more time she spent with them, the more I felt like I was losing her to their ideology. Our conversations changed. She started questioning things she'd never brought up before, as if she was trying to view me through their lens. It was maddening. I wasn't against women's rights or equality, far from it. But I wasn't about to stand by and let them poison Tiffany against me, against us. When Tiffany first brought up the idea of delaying the wedding, I felt my stomach drop. We'd been planning this for years. It was supposed to be the next big step in our lives together. Her tone was hesitant, and she kept saying things like, "I just need more time to think about what marriage really means." But I wasn't buying it. This wasn't her talking, it was them. The so-called feminist witches she surrounded herself with, filling her head with their anti-marriage nonsense. I couldn't hold back. I asked her straight up if this was their doing, if their warped ideas had gotten to her. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That silence was louder than any answer she could have given me. I was furious. The woman I loved, the woman I planned to spend my life with, couldn't even give me a straight answer. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just walked out. I needed air, space, anything but sitting there and watching the distance between us grow. I didn't go home that night. I turned my phone off and stayed out, trying to wrap my head around what was happening to us. How could the woman who once talked about having a family and growing old together suddenly be questioning everything? By the time I turned my phone back on, there were dozens of missed calls and texts from her. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't want to lose me and that we could figure things out together. It wasn't easy, but hearing her say that she still wanted us made me relent. I went back the next morning. When I walked through the door, she looked like she hadn't slept. She hugged me, tight, like she was afraid I might disappear again. I didn't say much, just held her for a while. I wanted to believe her when she said she didn't want to lose me, but a part of me wondered how much of Tiffany was still Tiffany, and how much had been replaced by the voices of her so-called friends. A few months had passed, and things between Tiffany and me were better on the surface, but there was still an undercurrent of tension. She'd gone back to spending more time with her feminist friends, parroting their ideas like one of their loyal flying monkeys. I kept trying to ignore it, hoping she'd eventually see through their nonsense and come back to being herself. But that hope was wearing thin. One day, she came home with a bright, almost nervous energy and dropped a bombshell. "Russell," she said, "how would you feel about going to India?" "India?" I repeated, caught completely off guard. "Why India?" She explained that she and her friends were planning a research trip to study the lives of women there, how they navigate their roles in society, how they're challenging norms, that sort of thing. The excitement in her voice was genuine, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the Tiffany I fell in love with, the curious, passionate woman who wanted to explore the world and make a difference. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another adventure cooked up by her friends, another way for them to fuel their agenda. "And you want me to come with you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yes," she said, almost pleading. "I think it would be good for both of us. You'd get to experience something new, and maybe it would help us understand each other better." I wanted to say no. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck halfway across the world with her friends, listening to their lectures about the evils of men and the glory of wild bears, or whatever new nonsense they'd come up with. But the look in her eyes stopped me. She was asking, not demanding, not pushing, but asking. And deep down, I knew that if I said no, it might be another wedge between us. "All right," I said finally, my reluctance obvious. "I'll come with you." Her face lit up, and for a moment, it felt like the old days again. Maybe this trip would be good for us. Maybe it would remind her of who we were before her friends got in the way. Or maybe it would be the final straw. Either way, I figured it was better than sitting back and letting things crumble around us. The flight to India was long, and sitting there with Tiffany and her friends was less than comfortable. They were in their own little bubble, chattering about their research plans, laughing at inside jokes, and occasionally glancing my way as if I was some sort of alien tagging along. I tried to tune them out, focusing instead on the journey ahead. When we landed in Assam, I was struck by how breathtaking the place was. Rolling hills, dense forests, and a kind of quiet that felt like a world away from the chaos back home. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this trip wouldn't be so bad. Tiffany seemed happy, and her enthusiasm about the place was infectious. I wanted to believe this was just about the research and not something more. But later that evening, my doubts resurfaced. I was unpacking in the modest little guest house we were staying at when I heard voices outside. It was Tiffany and her friends. At first, it was just the usual chatter, but then their tone shifted, more hushed and serious. I crept closer to the window, just enough to hear them clearly. "Did you speak to him?" one of them asked. "Not yet," Tiffany replied. "I'll tell him tomorrow." "You need to," another chimed in. "That's the whole reason you brought him here. He can't escape from here." My heart sank. Escape from what? I stayed frozen in place, every instinct screaming at me to confront them, but I held back. If they saw me listening, I'd never get the full story. Instead, I stayed up most of the night, running every worst-case scenario through my mind. What was Tiffany planning? Why did she need to bring me all the way here to tell me something? And what did her friend mean by he can't escape from here? I was suspicious, worried, and more than a little scared. Whatever was coming, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. The next morning, the guard at the guest house approached us as we were getting ready to head out. His face was serious, almost grim, as he spoke in his heavily accented English. "A bear has been attacking people in the village nearby. Please stay cautious and avoid the forest trails. It's dangerous." Before I could react, Tiffany's friends broke into laughter. One of them joked, "Honestly, being with a bear sounds better than being with a man." The others chimed in with their own quips, giggling like schoolgirls at their cleverness. The guard, however, didn't find it funny. He straightened his shoulders, his expression unchanging as he looked directly at them. "I really hope you never have to meet a sloth bear," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "He will not kill you, but every second that he is with you, you will wish you were dead. Bear attack victims are scarred for life, physically, mentally. If he comes, you will wish there was a man to save you." The laughter died out quickly, their smug smiles replaced by a mix of awkwardness and unease. The guard's words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. I couldn't help myself. I smiled and caught Tiffany's eye. There was a flicker of something in her expression, maybe irritation or embarrassment. It was hard to tell. "Guess not every man is so useless after all," I said lightly, but there was an edge to my voice. Tiffany didn't respond, just looked away, clearly uncomfortable. As we headed out for the day, the mood among her friends was noticeably more subdued. For once, their sharp tongues had been silenced, and I couldn't deny the small satisfaction I felt. But the guard's warning stayed with me. Out here, far from home, the rules were different. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dangers weren't just outside in the forest. They were within the very group I'd come here with. That evening, as Tiffany sat down across from me with a serious look on her face, I could already feel my heart sinking. "We need to talk." Those 4 words always seemed to carry the weight of something irreversible, and I knew this wasn't going to end well. She hesitated for a moment before diving in. "Russell," she began, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about our relationship, and I feel like I need to experience other people. I've only ever been with you, and I think it's important for me to date other men before we take the next step. I want to delay the wedding." I sat there, silent, letting her words settle like stones in my chest. So this was what it had come to. I didn't yell, didn't argue. Instead, I asked her, my voice calm, "So you want to date other men?" She nodded, avoiding my eyes. "All right," I said, keeping my tone measured. "So that means I can date other women, too?" That got her attention. Her head snapped up, and I could see the agitation bubbling beneath her composed exterior. Before she could say anything, I continued, "If it's good for you, then it's good for me. Equality of genders, right?" Her expression faltered. She clearly hadn't expected that response. Reluctantly, she nodded, but the tension in her jaw was unmistakable. I pressed further, keeping my tone even. "And what happens if I find someone better? Someone I don't want to leave? What if I don't want to get back together with you?" Now she wasn't just agitated. She was outright defensive. Her voice rose, tinged with anger. "As a woman, I've been from the oppressed gender. This isn't the same. I can date other men because I need to grow and experience life. But you need to stay faithful to me. That's different." She was practically frothing, her words spilling out in a rush of frustration and contradiction. I, however, remained calm, which only seemed to irritate her more. "Tiffany," I said, leaning back slightly, "if you truly believe in equality of genders, then it works both ways. You can't have one set of rules for yourself and another for me. That's not equality. That's bullshit entitlement." Her face flushed, and she looked like she was about to argue. But for once, she had no response. I listened to her crying, but my decision was made. This trip had been a setup from the start, her carefully orchestrated way of breaking this to me in an isolated place, where she thought I wouldn't have any choice but to accept it. It was clear she'd already thought this through, likely even made a list of the suitable men she wanted to experience while I sat back and played the fool. Standing up, I said calmly, "Since it seems you brought me all the way here just for this conversation, I can only assume you've already done your homework and have a list of potential candidates for your experience. My role here seems done. I'm heading back." I began packing my bags while she pleaded, her voice cracking as tears rolled down her face. "Please, Russell, don't do this. Just think about it. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just need time. I don't want to lose you." I zipped up my bag and turned to her, keeping my tone steady. "If you need time and a list, then I need to get started on my own. Unlike you, I didn't come prepared. I need to head back home to begin my experience." Her friends came in, likely alerted by the commotion, and started trying to reason with me. One of them stepped forward, her voice dripping with faux concern, trying to spin this as some sort of growth opportunity for all of us. I looked at her, unimpressed. "You know," I said, my tone cutting, "you have a great body. Maybe under different circumstances, I'd even consider sleeping with you. But the truth is, you're so ugly on the inside that I can't even stomach looking at you for long." The room went silent. Her friend froze, and Tiffany's tears turned into a shocked gasp. None of them had a reply to that. I called the guest house guard and asked him to help me arrange transport to another hotel. He nodded without question, his no-nonsense demeanor a small comfort in this absurd situation. The next morning, I boarded a flight back to the USA. Tiffany kept calling, her messages alternating between apologies and angry tirades, but I ignored every single one. I had nothing more to say. As the plane took off, I looked out the window, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what we'd lost, and relief that I wasn't going to let myself be strung along any longer. If she wanted to explore her options, that was her choice. But I wasn't going to wait around for her to decide whether I was worth coming back to. A day after I returned to the U.S., I got a message from one of Tiffany's friends, one of the so-called witches. It was a photo of another member of their group, her face pale and bruised, with an arm wrapped in bandages. The caption read, "The bear got her." Apparently, the sloth bear that the guard had warned us about had attacked her while she was exploring one of the forest trails. I later learned she needed 97 stitches just to hold herself together. It was poetic, in a grim sort of way, a brutal reminder of how reality doesn't care for their lofty ideologies. The group stayed in India for another week, but I was long gone by then. Back home, I had already decided I wasn't going to give Tiffany a second chance. She had made her choices clear, and I wasn't going to wait around to be her backup plan. I packed up all of her belongings, neatly labeled them, and had everything sent to her father's house. When I called her father to explain the situation, he surprised me by agreeing wholeheartedly. "If she wants to screw around, that's her decision," he said bluntly, "but no decent man would stick around for that. I would have done the same thing." Then, with a bitterness that matched my own, he added, "Given her new ideology, she probably hates me, too. When she comes for her stuff, she can leave my house just as quickly. She's made her bed. Now she can lie in it." A week later, Tiffany showed up at my door, looking exhausted and defeated. I opened it just enough to see her face, and she immediately started talking, her voice shaky and desperate. "Russell, please, I'm sorry," she began. "I made a mistake. Let's just talk." I cut her off before she could finish. "Tiffany, you did not make a mistake. You made a choice. There is a difference. You want to go out and increase your body count. Be my guest. I'll tell all my friends that you are ready to experiment. In fact, let me do it right now." I opened my social media page and posted, "Tiffany is no longer with me and is looking to hook up with different men every day. Please book your slots." Her phone pinged, informing that she got the notification. "All your stuff is at your father's place. You have nothing here anymore. This chapter is closed." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she was about to argue. But before she could say another word, I stepped back and shut the door. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Tiffany had made her choices, and I had made mine. Life would go on, and I'd find my way forward without the weight of her indecision dragging me down. A few months after the fallout with Tiffany, life had taken a brighter turn for Russell. He'd met someone new, a charming, down-to-earth woman who shared his interests and values. Their connection had been instant, and within weeks of dating, they decided to move in together. Life felt refreshing again, unburdened by the chaos and drama of his previous relationship. One evening, after a cozy movie night, Russell and his girlfriend were walking home, enjoying the cool air and the relaxed silence between them. As they rounded a corner, a commotion caught their attention. There she was, Tiffany. Her once put-together appearance was replaced by a disheveled, almost unrecognizable figure. She was wearing an outfit so revealing it left little to the imagination, stumbling drunkenly with two equally intoxicated women. The three of them were trying, and failing, to get off the ground, their actions clumsy and pathetic. Around them, a small crowd had gathered, phones out, live-streaming and laughing at the spectacle, some of them just touching them. Russell's girlfriend slowed her steps, concern flickering in her eyes. "Should we help them?" she asked softly, looking up at him. He stopped, glanced at the scene, and let out a small, humorless laugh. "Nah," he said with a shrug. "She wanted the streets, and now she belongs to the streets." His girlfriend gave him a searching look, but said nothing as they walked away. The image of Tiffany, lost and humiliated, lingered in Russell's mind for a moment, but only for a moment. He had moved on. She had made her choices, and this was the life she'd carved out for herself. Months later, Russell received an unexpected call from Tiffany's father. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and worry. "She overdosed," he said bluntly. "She's in the hospital." I just thought you should know. I'm not asking you to do anything. I know you've moved on. I didn't know who else to tell." Russell leaned back in his chair, the news sinking in slowly. A part of him wanted to feel something more. Regret, sympathy, maybe even anger. But all he could muster was a distant sense of pity. "Take care of her," he said simply, his tone devoid of emotion. After a pause, he added, "Not all friends are true friends. Maybe she'll figure that out one day." He ended the call and put his phone down, turning back to his girlfriend, who was reading on the couch. She glanced up at him, sensing something had shifted. "Everything okay?" she asked. Russell nodded, giving her a small smile. "Yeah, just a reminder of why I'm grateful for where I am now." With that, he left the past where it belonged, behind him, and focused on the life he was building with someone who truly valued him. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.